and some outbreaks of rain pushing into western areas through the night. Mostly across southwest England before midnight, but some showers then developing over Wales and eventually into parts of Northern Ireland. These showers could turn quite heavy as we go towards dawn. Elsewhere, most places again dry and clear, 1 or 2 mist and fog patches, but generally not as misty, not as foggy and not as cold as last night. Cloudier day to come then on Wednesday, certainly for Wales and Northern Ireland, with some outbreaks of rain. Could be quite heavy in places too. We'll see some showers drifting up towards northwest England by the end of the day. More showers coming into the southwest. Hit and miss though. Much of the day will be dry, and certainly over the Midlands, eastern England, most of Scotland. It is another dry day, just with more cloud compared to today. Still quite mild in the south, but it is turning windier. Some gusty winds developing through the course of Wednesday, particularly during the evening, and we'll see more heavy showers coming in. So quite a change across southwestern parts during Wednesday evening. Say some heavy outbreaks of rain for southwest England and parts of Wales. And the outlook is for more showers as we go through Thursday and particularly Friday. But through this week, staying fairly mild.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
.6 p.m. and coming up, I'm feeling a little bit sorry for Liz Truss. She's now the most unpopular major UK political leader in the last 2 decades. A YouGov survey suggests just 10% of Brits have a favourable opinion of our Prime Minister. A Snap poll of Tory members also shows more than half believe that she should resign. I can't help but wonder, though, whether or not people are just annoyed with their own lives and they're taking it out on Liz. The Prime Minister held a cabinet meeting this morning, hours after saying she was sorry for her government's, what she said anyway, were mistakes, and that they had tried to move too far, too fast. She didn't look well yesterday in Parliament, I thought. Can she recover, or will she forever be about as popular as Novichok? Also this hour, a shock to households as families could face average energy bills of up to £5,000 this winter after the government's policy U-turn. Can someone explain to me how this is more popular than what it was before? But anyway, there we go. The warning comes as National Grid claims the UK could see blackouts between 4 p.m. till 7 p.m. on weekdays during the colder months, which actually, now you think about it, would be terrible news for this show, wouldn't it, given the times that we're on now? But there we are. And the Dartford crossing remains blocked for the 2nd day in a row after the QE2 bridge was scaled by 2 Just Stop Oil protests on Monday. Some people fired fireworks at them overnight, which of course we can't condone. Our Homeland Security editor Mark White is at the scene. But before that, here's your latest headlines.
Good afternoon, just 2 minutes past 3. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The Chancellor's told the Cabinet to find ways of saving taxpayers' money in their respective departments, with public spending currently at around £1 trillion. Well, the meeting came as Liz Truss apologised for the mistakes she made in her first few weeks as Prime Minister. She's hoping the admission that she went too far, too fast trying to grow the economy will pacify the party. Well, when ministers left number 10 today, they didn't comment on whether they're backing the Prime Minister, who has vowed to lead the Conservatives into the next general election. The Armed Forces Minister, James Heappey, told GB News that the Conservatives need to get on with delivering for the country.
Whilst nobody would pretend that the last 5 or 6 weeks have been the start to her premiership she would have wanted, the reality is that, yes, a mistake was made. She went too far, too fast with the mini-budget as it was. But there are also a set of global economic conditions that require stability in government. There's also a security situation in Europe right now that requires stability in government. And what we must do as Conservative politicians is row in behind the Prime Minister.
Voters in the Prime Minister's South West Norfolk constituency say they're not convinced she'll last as a leader.
I think she's out of her depth, really. So I think they're just delaying the inevitable. I think she's going to have to resign.
Well, the woman's lost the plot, and we're going to suffer for some of the stupid U-turns that have been put on upon us now.
The longer she's there, the bigger lead that the Labour Party will have.
The UK has summoned a Chinese diplomat over the assault of a protester at the consulate in Manchester. Now, a quick warning, if you're watching on television, we're going to show you images of a person being attacked. Now, the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, is demanding an explanation after this video emerged of a Hong Kong protester, democracy demonstrator, being dragged onto the ground before being beaten. Well, Beijing blamed what it described as a disturbing element of illegally entering its consulate on Sunday. Police are investigating. British households are being warned to prepare for potential blackouts in the new year. National Grid's chief executive says they could occur on really, really cold weekdays between 4 and 7 p.m. in the evenings in January and February next year. John Pettigrew issued the warning of potential rolling blackouts during the Financial Times' Energy Transition Summit, outlining possible scenarios if generators fail to secure enough gas from continental Europe to meet demand. 26 climate protesters, have been arrested after blocking a main road into West London. The Just Stop Oil activists disrupted traffic on the A4 this morning, blocking both carriageways near Barron's Court. Well, police removed the campaigners after some had glued themselves to the tarmac. The Dartford crossing linking Essex and Kent remains blocked for a second day after Just Stop Oil activists scaled the QE2 bridge. National Highways says there's about 6 miles of congestion on either side of the crossing, and it has no idea when the bridge will reopen. One of the 2 protesters has said they'll stay up there until the government cancels all new oil and gas extraction licences.
Oil and gas is killing us now, and it's driving millions into poverty this winter. So we have to have an emergency transition to renewable energy, to provide us stable, affordable energy. And we've got to pay for that transition using the profits of the oil and gas industry and the rich.
Rail workers in the RMT union are voting on whether to continue strike action for another 6 months. Over 40,000 union members at Network Rail and 15 train companies have taken part in nationwide walkouts since June. On some strike days, the disruption meant only 20% of services were running across the country. Some areas had no trains at all. The ballot to continue industrial action will close on the 15th of November. Russia's launched new airstrikes targeting the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. 2 people were reportedly killed when missiles hit an energy facility. Ukraine's presidential office says there's also been 2 missile strikes in the southeastern city of Dnipro, causing a fire and serious damage. In the north of the country, another airstrike has left a city without water and electricity. Daniel Craig has been awarded the same honour held by his character, James Bond. Princess Anne presented the 007 actor with the Companion of the Order of St Michael and St George during a service at Windsor Castle. Well, the honour recognises his contribution to film and theatre. You're up to date now on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to Patrick.
I'll just say what we're all thinking, as if Daniel Craig, the actor, has been awarded the same thing as an actual spy. But there we go, clown world. Anyway, in a few moments, we'll turn our attention to the ongoing political crisis as pressure mounts on Liz Truss. But I'm a little bit sick of constantly talking about the revolving door at number 10, even though it is quite hard to ignore the fact that about 80% of people apparently hate our Prime Minister. I wanted to do something properly patriotic. So, should children be taught the national anthem in school? Should they sing it as well? The chair of the Social Mobility Commission is calling on all school children to be taught the national anthem or risk being taught they don't, quote, belong in their own country. Could it help with integration, basically? So, Catherine Birbalsingh also said teachers should make sure ethnic minority children learn the anthem, even if it makes teachers feel uncomfortable. So, basically, the crux of this is, should children with foreign heritage have the national anthem implanted into part of their daily lives as a way of helping them integrate and to promote British values? So I thought, OK, where could I find a load of non-British people walking around the streets of London? Somewhere as well that's also at the same time a bastion of patriotism. Obviously, it's Buckingham Palace. So let's see what people said.
I think it's an important thing to learn the national anthem from young age, because it's a national thing, and you should have the patriot in your heart from young age.
We sang God Save the Queen in Canada until probably the late 60s. So
in school?
In school, God Save the Queen at our assemblies, yeah. Yes. And we had a picture of the Queen on our wall.
And was that nice?
Yes, we
didn't mind it at all. It didn't hurt us in any way.
They should, probably.
Why?
Well, it's a kind of, English heritage and all that, so they should learn that very much.
In America, I don't remember ever being forced to sing it, so I guess my instinct would be to say you shouldn't be forced to do it, I guess.
Do you think they should be at least made to learn it?
Sure, I don't see anything wrong with that. It seems perfectly logical to me.
I'm Australian.
Yeah.
I don't like our national anthem,
really?
so yeah.
Why not?
Oh, because I don't
it's
know.
Bad tune.
Yeah, the tune's even not that bad, but it's just old.
Do you know the Australian national anthem?
Yes.
Do you want to sing a little bit of it?
Okay. Australians, oh, let us rejoice in history's pace. Let every stage to advance Australia fair.
Well done, fantastic. Oh, well done. You got a high five for that. Brilliant. Yes, there we go. That's one way to spend an afternoon, I suppose. So what do you think about this? Because we're going to be returning to this throughout the show, which is whether or not you think that kids should be taught the national anthem in schools and essentially made to sing it. Do you think it would help integration? Do you think it would help people feel more British? Do you think it would help people going forward in their lives? A little bit of good old British patriotism. What do you think? GBviews at gbnews.uk. You can, of course, tweet us as well at GBnews. In fact, I'm running a poll on this on my own Twitter at Patrick Christys. Cheeky little plug, get the follow account up. But back to something a lot more depressing. Liz Truss. Oh, gosh, the continued pressure which leaves her premiership in serious doubt. The Prime Minister survived a meeting of the Cabinet this morning. Yeah, it's not medieval times, but there we go. Without any ministers calling for her to quit. But Tory members and voters appear to be turning on her now. A YouGov Snap poll of Tory members released this afternoon suggests more than half want her to resign as Prime Minister, and more than 80% believe she's doing a bad job. There's now 5 Conservative MPs who've publicly called on the Prime Minister in her first few weeks in post. It's worth remembering, though, that one of those Tory MPs who remain named has called for pretty much every single Tory PM to resign in the last few months. But there we go. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, said the government now has no economic policy after it demolished the mini-budget. So is Liz Truss on the verge of losing the keys to number 10? We are going to go first to GB News' political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who's in Westminster. Oh, Darren, is it really this bad for Liz Truss? I mean, no Prime Minister's ever massively, massively popular, are they? This is especially bad, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is especially bad in the sense that you've got a majority now of Conservative members, the people who voted for her only a matter of months ago, suggesting that she needs to go and go immediately. I've just spoken to a Conservative MP who effectively said that the carpet was worn out outside Sir Graham Brady's office because so many Conservative MPs had handed in letters calling for Liz Truss to go. Anne-Marie Trevelyan, a Cabinet Minister, said that it was probably true that the Cabinet had confidence still in the Prime Minister. When you add all that together, Minister, it does look pretty desperate for Liz Truss, doesn't it? In saying that, I think, Patrick, she's got a little bit of breathing space at the moment. I think the appointment of Jeremy Hunt, the fact that she's had to U-turn on pretty much her entire policy board has in some ways, though, helped her. It's calmed the markets, sterling's up a little bit, and it's given her a little bit of space here at Westminster. But as, like everything in politics, there is always trouble around the corner. First of all, big decisions to make on whether you link the increase in benefits with earnings or inflation. Where does defence spending go? Defence ministers suggesting they will resign if they do not keep this commitment of increasing defence spending up to 3% of GDP by the end of the decade. Questions too about the triple lock pension as well. Is the government committed to that? So really, really big, potentially controversial decisions to take. And also, we've got PMQs tomorrow. Now, PMQs come and go. They're kind of good ones and bad ones. But my word, Patrick, Liz Truss needs a damn good PMQs tomorrow. I think she's got a pretty bad one. Again, that will weigh quite heavily on her. So Liz Truss, is still in Downing Street. She is still the Prime Minister. But my word, she's got an awful lot on her plate. She's got some really big, difficult decisions to come. And the problem for her is every one of those decisions could be a crisis point for her leadership.
Darren, thank you very much. Darren McCaffrey, there, GB News' political editor, joined by a chap behind him there who makes you wish we hadn't sold off all our water cannons. The Prime Minister did hold that Cabinet meeting this morning, asked if any of the Cabinet suggested Liz Truss should quit during that meeting. The Prime Minister's official spokesman said no, which is, I think, a pretty low bar, isn't it? But there we go. Joining me now is William Atkinson, who's the assistant editor of Conservative Home. William, thank you very much for joining me. Are the Tories just committing political suicide here? Can't they get behind Liz?
I think they struggle to get behind Liz because the agenda on which she was elected by party members only about 6 weeks ago has now been junked in its entirety due to the catastrophe that was the mini-budget and then the loss, the resignation/sacking, depending on whether you ask the Prime Minister or the Chancellor, of Kwasi Kwarteng. It now is very much the case that Liz Truss is in office but not in power. We've got to remember, it was only in the last couple of weeks, actually, at the leadership election, that a majority of MPs actually came out in support of her. She had never been the choice of MPs. She only scraped through into the final two on the last round of voting. So she was already behind when she got into office in terms of actually having support from her own MPs.
Well, this is it. And she's inherited a pretty dire situation as well. I think people generally around the country were pretty dissatisfied, not necessarily just with the Tories, but with politicians as a whole, right? And then she's come along. One thing I would be concerned about if I was a Conservative would be that now, has there left an open space for another new political party? Because the way that this has looked now to a lot of people is that Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, all right, maybe the optics were bad, trying to do something different, but they're in the pockets of the bankers and the status quo lot, and then in comes Jeremy Hunt, who's a Remainer who wasn't that against mandatory vaccines, for example, and castrates her previous Chancellor before in the House of Commons, and it does look a little bit like we're being led by the men in suits.
Well, I think you could very much say that after a 6-week experiment with trying to defy Treasury orthodoxy is very much back in vogue. But I think when you're talking about whether it would be possible for the Conservatives to be supplanted by another sort of start-up centre-right party, I mean, obviously, as somebody who works for Conservative Home, I have some sort of interest in the Conservative brand continuing. But I think that really depends on the outcome of the next general election. I mean, people would have traditionally thought a bad result would have been like 1997, the Tories losing more than half their seats, not just losing power, but losing power for a generation. I think a really bad result now, if some of the polling we're seeing at the moment is correct, would be like the 1993 election in Canada, where essentially the Conservative Party there went from being in power to losing 20% of the votes and having only 2 seats and being wiped out as a political force. And again, it took a whole generation before another centre-right party could actually return to government in Canada. And I think at the moment, any Conservative MP who is bothered to look at foreign elections would be really worried about that sort of scenario developing.
But is the Conservative Party that conservative at the moment? I can't really see them caring too much about immigration or illegal immigration, certainly not visibly anyway. High taxation, for example, it just seems a bit unconservative.
Well, I mean, not to go all sort of political philosophy, but I think if you asked 3 different Conservatives what it meant to be a Conservative, you would get 3 different answers. And I think what we see with Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, a sort of cargo cult Thatcherism, more sort of classical liberalism than traditional Toryism, I would say, is a different strand of conservatism from the sort of high spending, low tax, pro-science, pro-Brexit conservatism that won them the election in 2019, but that itself is different from that of David Cameron or Theresa May. And I think the party is a complete muddle about this at the moment. Actually, it needs to realise that you can have policies, you can have a particular agenda, but as the last few weeks have shown, you are still constrained by outside forces, primarily the market.
Well, again, this is another angle that picks up on what I was saying before about whether or not they're particularly conservative at the moment or whether or not they're leaving fertile ground to someone else. You know, Liz Truss and Jeremy Hunt at the helm. I mean, it's just Remainer central, isn't it?
Well, it's certainly not the leadership, should we say, or the prospectus that I think gave us that majority in 2019, that stonking majority under Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings. But I think both of them have now long since left government. So through various tergiversations, we now have a very different agenda and a very different government.
We do. Now, some of these polls have come out, you know, roughly 80% of people think Liz Truss is doing a bad job, all right, fine. But also in those polls, it did show that quite a lot of people wanted Boris Johnson back. Conservative voters, that is, Conservative members, I should say, wanted Boris Johnson back. Any chance?
No. I think, as though a colleague of mine has written a fantastic book about Boris that's just come out that is the best case for Boris you can possibly read. I think Tory MPs are still so jaded for the last few months of Boris Johnson's leadership that they would struggle to put him back in power.
Even if it meant winning the next election?
I think they would have to see some sort of genuine, hard, continual evidence that voters had said, Boris, we were sorry, you can have us back.
With
like
all
one or
is
two of his ex-wives, and then, yes...
all is forgiven.
Be back in power.
Yes, not just his ex-wives. All right, thank you very much, William. Great to have you on the show, mate. We'll have to have you back on very, very soon. William Atkinson there is the assistant editor of Conservative Home. What do you make of that? Do you agree with the polls that are coming out at the moment, which, I suppose, to break it down for you, show that the vast majority of the public apparently hate Liz Truss and do not want her in office well, any day longer than they absolutely have to. But is that quite right? Do you feel a bit sorry for Liz? I must say I did feel a bit sorry for her yesterday when she came into Parliament. She didn't look herself, did she? And Penny Mordaunt has stood up and taken a bit of a kicking on her behalf. But there we go. Make sure that you get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But get in touch while you can, actually, ladies and gentlemen, because I think this is the way that I find out my show's been cancelled. Because get yourself some candles and a match or two, because you might need them this winter, because households are being warned of blackouts. When would the blackouts take place, you might example? Would they take place, oh, I don't know, during the breakfast show? No. Would they take place during prime time? No, they take place between 4 and 7 p.m, which is essentially when I'm on air, every single weekday. Good stuff. So there we are. Apparently, that's going to happen if gas imports are reduced. We're going to have blackouts across the country. The warning comes as the supply of gas to European countries continues to be threatened by Russia's war in Ukraine. I'm joined now by Malcolm Grimston, who is a senior research fellow at the Centre for Energy, Policy and Technology at Imperial College. I'm sorry, Malcolm, I'm just coming to terms with the fact that I might actually be off air now, and this is how I have to find out. And, you know, the nation mourns. But on a slightly more serious note, though, are we actually really going to have blackouts this winter on especially cold days?
Probably not, but it's more likely this year than it has been for many, many years, both because we've gradually run down our reliable power capacity as we become more dependent on wind and solar. Now, solar isn't a great deal of use at 7 o'clock on a winter's night. And if we do hit a spot where there's not much wind around and where imports of gas are reduced for whatever reason, particularly obviously because of the Ukrainian situation, then on a particularly cold day when demand goes up, we may face some power cuts, limited, I would guess, to particular areas to try and protect as much as possible. But it is more possible this year than it has been for a long time, but still less likely than likely.
OK, I mean, I suppose one thing it inevitably will mean is a baby boom.
They claim that there was an enormous power cut in New York in 1977, and it is claimed that the birth rate went up very significantly 9 months later. I think that's probably an urban myth. But yes, people will find their own ways of staying warm, undoubtedly.
People find their own ways of staying warm and indeed occupying themselves. Yes, absolutely. What do you make of what's been going on at the moment in terms of the U-turns, the latest U-turn that could mean that we're all paying around $5,000 for our energy bills? I mean, part of me thinks I'd have a self-enforced blackout if it meant I was going to pay that amount of money.
It is obviously a very difficult one. The cost of subsidising everybody's energy bill was staggering. And I've felt for some time, actually, the price mechanism, high prices do have some benefits. Firstly, they make us take energy efficiency a lot more seriously. Japan, for many, many years, decades, has had quite high energy prices per unit. But the household bills aren't much higher than over here because it does mean that people take energy very seriously. They lag their homes properly. They don't leave things on unnecessarily. And that brings bills down again. And clearly high prices focus our minds very much on that point of view. From that point of view. And we do need periods of high prices to stimulate the investment that's going to bring those prices down again. And so I always thought that targeting the support towards the people who really needed it most, which is what the government is now saying.
Targeted support would make a lot more sense than just a blanket support. But Malcolm, very quickly and finally, when we had the COVID pandemic, I mean, I had doctors on television telling me to sing Happy Birthday while I wash my hands. I had people telling me to get jabbed left, right and centre, saying I couldn't go and hug my grandma and all of this stuff. But now we have an energy crisis. Should the government maybe be coming out and telling people how they can actually save money on their energy bills? I don't want to get too nanny state, but what I am saying, the bar was set incredibly low during COVID. Try not to sneeze on someone who's visibly unwell on public transport. Well, what about now? Teach us how to save a bit of money.
Completely agree. A set of things about what in the home uses a lot of energy and what doesn't use so much would be helpful. Suggestions. I mean, it is remarkable how much just reducing the thermostat by a degree or two can save on your bills. So, yes, I do think this is a role for government.
All right, Malcolm, thank you very much. Malcolm Grimston there is a Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for Energy Policy and Technology at Imperial College. Great stuff. Right, well, lots to get stuck into for the remainder of this show. No doubt why one of those TVs behind me has just turned off. Coming up, is the line eco-protesters aren't willing to cross? It appears not, as Dartford crossing remains blocked for the second day in a row after the QE2 bridge was scaled by two Just Stop Oil protesters. Why not just leave them there? Just leave them there. Anyway, our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, is at the scene. We're reliably informed that he is not the person who was firing fireworks at those two people last night. I'll be back in a tick. Stay tuned.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back, everybody. Now, the Dartford crossing remains blocked for a second day as a Just Stop Oil protest continues. The QE2 bridge, which links Kent and Essex, has been closed since it was scaled by 2 climbers from the group on Monday. So the climate activist group wants the government to, well, we all know what they want, halt all new oil and gas licences and consents as well, and says that the climbers will stay on top of the bridge until they are brought down, which I think maybe I speak for everyone when I say I hope is never. Meanwhile, around 30 activists also caused traffic disruption in West London this morning, blocking a main road during rush hour. These are just the latest in a series of Just Stop Oil protests that have been taking place over the last couple of weeks. Let's get more on this now from our Home and Security editor, Mark White, who's in West London. Mark, good to have you back. I've been seeing you for a little while on my show. So, yes, what's the latest with Just Stop Oil? They're still being a nuisance.
Yeah, they are, and they say they're going nowhere anytime soon. They say that as far as their action is concerned, they will only stop their protests when the government decides to stop issuing more oil and gas licences. And given that there is a fat chance that that's going to happen, then I'm afraid we're in this for the long haul. And what the long haul has meant so far this month anyway is protests taking place in and around London and, of course, in Dartford pretty much every day. We had one here on the A4 this morning, this busy arterial route into central London, blocked for some 2 hours, 50 plus police officers out here once again having to deal with these protesters. Shocking. And tied up for 2 hours as they got those protesters unglued from the roadway, uncoupled from each other and into the backs of police vans. They would much rather, the police of course, they would much rather be out in their own boroughs policing London, dealing with the very significant rise in violent crime over recent years.
Well, exactly.
But instead they're tied up and dealing with these protesters who say they're going to continue this action, Patrick.
Yeah, exactly, Mark. And I've been seeing a lot more videos online of members of the public either A, prepared to take matters into their own hands, which I think we can all agree could have some potentially quite dangerous consequences going forward, which you wouldn't like to see. But people are getting increasingly frustrated from what I can see, Mark. No doubt the police are getting increasingly frustrated as well. When Insulate Britain were in their pomp, as it were, eventually they stopped because a few of them, well, became Insulate Prison, didn't they? Is there any chance of this happening with Just Stop Oil, do you think?
Well, that's certainly what the Home Secretary is hoping for. New legislation is being issued to amendments to the bill that's going through the Houses of Parliament at the moment, the Public Order Bill, with a view to getting stiffer penalties for those involved in these protests, because at the moment, of course, the crimes that they're committing are fairly minor in the scheme of things. Blocking the King's Highway, that kind of obstruction and direct action can lead to fines, but effectively it's a revolving door of being arrested, processed and let out within hours just to go back and commit the same kind of offences again. That's why the Home Secretary wants to introduce those injunctions that we saw working eventually quite well with Insulate Britain, whereby it was a more serious offence that they were committing because injunctions were put in place. They continue to break these injunctions, and of course that is a more serious offence in breach of a court-imposed injunction, and it meant the courts then had the power to jail these protesters. Eventually they did jail dozens of protesters, and it appeared certainly to have an effect on Insulate Britain. But now, of course, Insulate Britain have died down, but what do we have? We've got other groups like Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion popping up again and carrying out the same kind of direct action. This protest obviously taking place in Dartford, still ongoing.
Yeah.
That will only end when the two people on the bridge decide to get tired and cold and hungry and they want to get down. That's the only time that's going to end.
Mark, thank you very, very much. Mark White, there, our home and security editor. There we are. What do you make of all of that, people? GBViews at gbnews.uk. I must say I think like the rest of us, sickened yesterday to see videos of people shooting fireworks at those people on the Dartford crossing, and it really is. You can't condone that kind of behaviour. Best £100 I ever spent. Coming up, can the new Met Police Commissioner get his officers in line after a damning report revealed hundreds of officers were getting away with breaking the law and misconduct? Mark Rowley has emailed staff warning them that they face the sack if they cross the line. What does this all really mean, people? Can we still trust our police force? Do they get a bit of a raw deal? I'm surprised they've got time to break the law themselves, given the amount of people that they're now ungluing from a road. But first, it's your latest headlines.
A very good afternoon. It's 3:33. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. The Chancellors told the Cabinet to find ways of saving taxpayers' money in their respective departments, with public spending standing at around £1 trillion. Well, the meeting came as Liz Truss apologised for the mistakes she made in her first few weeks as Prime Minister. She's hoping the admission that she went too far, too fast, trying to grow the economy will pacify the party. British households are being warned to prepare for potential blackouts in the new year. National Grid's chief executive says they could occur on really, really cold weekdays between 4 p.m. and 7 in January and February. John Pettigrew issued the warning of potential rolling blackouts during the Financial Times' Energy Transition Summit, outlining possible scenarios if generators fail to secure enough gas from continental Europe. The UK has summoned China's charge d'affaires over the assault of a protester at the Chinese consulate in Manchester. Now, a quick warning, if you're watching on television, we're about to show you images of an individual being attacked. The Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, is demanding an explanation after this video emerged of a Hong Kong pro-democracy demonstrator being dragged onto the ground before being beaten. Beijing has blamed what it described as a disturbing element of illegally entering its consulate on Sunday. Police are investigating. The Dartford crossing linking Essex and Kent remains blocked for a second day now after Just Stop Oil activists scaled the QE2 bridge. National Highways says there's about 6 miles of congestion on either side of the crossing, and it has no idea when the bridge will reopen. Daniel Craig has been awarded the same honour held by his character, James Bond. Princess Anne presented the 007 actor with the Companion of the Order of St Michael and St George, recognising his contribution to film and theatre. We're on your TV, we're online and your DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other pay-per-review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back, everybody. Now, earlier I spoke to people outside Buckingham Palace about whether school children should be taught the national anthem. And lots of you have been getting in touch with your views on this. Not just taught it, made to sing it. But anyway, there we go. I agree, Jackie says. I agree children should sing the national anthem at school. It won't do them any harm and might make them proud of their country. Well, that's the point, actually. Jan says it's no good teaching the national anthem without teaching British history too, including the history of our monarchy. OK, so a wider royal and patriotic education there for them. Rebecca says, I don't think you need to sing a song to be proud of this country. Fair enough. Living and existing here and abiding by the rules should be enough to count as a patriotic person. Well, we will be discussing that topic throughout the show. It does come after one of our social mobility czars, Miss Burble Singh, who is, I think, a bit of a favourite here on GB News, did suggest earlier on today that she thought that some teachers should teach kids at schools the national anthem and then not make them sing it, but, encourage them to sing it, and also as a way of maybe encouraging integration as well. What do you make of that? GBViews at GBNews.uk. Like I said, we will be discussing that later on. But, moving on, allegations surrounding the late Lord Mountbatten will be heard in a Belfast court this week. A former resident of a children's home in the city has waived his anonymity, claiming he experienced abuse by Mountbatten during the 1970s. GB News' royal reporter Cameron Walker joins me now in the studio. Cameron, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. What do we know about these allegations, then?
Well, Lord Mountbatten, of course, is the royal, that's Prince Charles, now King Charles. It says he is the grandfather I never had. That was a quote from 2015. He had a strong influence on Prince Charles's upbringing. They went fishing together, enjoyed outdoor activities together. Then, of course, Lord Mountbatten was killed by an IRA bomb in 1979. And now we understand that he is being accused by one person of allegedly sexually abusing an 11-year-old boy in the 1970s. Now, this 11-year-old boy is now grown up. His name is Arthur Smith, as you just referred to in your link there, Patrick. He's waived his right of anonymity, and he is bringing civil action against public institutions alleging negligence and a breach of duty of care. Now, heavy stuff. Arthur was a resident of a children's home called King Cora and another children's home called North Road Children's Home. Now, in 2017, there was a big public inquiry into historic sexual abuse in Northern Ireland, and that found that 39 boys were sexually abused in King Cora care home. Over the years, 3 staff members were jailed, but there was no evidence of an institutional cover-up of any kind. Now, Arthur's case in particular, that's being heard in a Belfast court, the High Court in Belfast this week, refers to allegations he is making specifically against Lord Mountbatten. As I said, he's waived his right of anonymity. And he says the reason for that, or his lawyer does at least, is because it's born out of anger at, and I quote, systematic state cover-up on abuse at these institutions.
Goodness me, it is heavy stuff, actually. Cameron, look, thank you very much for bringing us that story. Obviously, you'll bring us the developments as they rumble on.
Yes, I'm just going to say very quickly that Buckingham Palace, of course, never comments on any legal proceedings. They're not involved in this case whatsoever, but of course it's very uncomfortable because Lord Mountbatten was a senior member of the royal family.
All right, look, Cameron, thank you very much. And yes, we'll be bringing you the latest on that as that case rumbles on. Cameron Walker there, our royal reporter. Right, OK, so moving away. The Met Police Commissioner says that banter is no excuse for using abusive language after a damning report that shows hundreds of officers within the force are getting away with breaking the law and misconduct. Mark Rowley has emailed officers warning them that they could face the sack if they crossed the line, following the report by Baroness Casey, which found many claims of sexual misconduct, misogyny, racism and homophobia within the force had essentially gone unpunished. One serving officer had 11 misconduct notices for allegations involving assault, sexual harassment and indeed fraud. So, can we trust our police? Rather a lot to get stuck into here, I must say. I'm joined now by Police and Crime Commissioner for Hampshire, Donna Jones. Donna, thank you very much. And former Detective Chief Superintendent of the Met, Kevin Hurley. Donna, I'll start with you, if that's all right. Obviously, I think we can all agree that any genuine cases of sexual misconduct or misogyny or whatever, crimes, I suppose, really, racism, for example, are terrible, terrible things. But can it be quite difficult for a police and crime commissioner sometimes to see what is maybe banter between colleagues and something that's actually deeply offensive?
Yeah, well, obviously, Patrick, you're absolutely right. It's often a grey area, but it is right and proper that standards in policing are increased, particularly in the Met, where it's one of the it is the largest police force in this country, one of the largest police forces in Europe, and there are some systemic issues. And I think credit where credit's due here. So Mark Rowley has really, I think his response to Dame Cressida was humble. I think what he said to Louise Casey in his reply back to her was very, very good as well. He sent that letter last Friday. He's taken it on the chin. He acknowledges that there are, systemic changes required in the Met. And actually, when I watched what he said on telly yesterday, I was quite humbled by that. I thought he was putting his hands up and acknowledging the Met needs to change significantly. But yes, it is a grey area. Often it's not black and white. But one thing we do know is that these kind of behaviours must stop. And what happens in the Met often sends a tidal wave across British policing and in the rest of the country.
Kevin, I'll bring you in now, former Detective Chief Superintendent of the Met Police. Kevin, were you aware of systemic issues like these, of going unpunished, police being above the law?
Well, as a former Police and Crime Commissioner myself in Surrey, I'm very pleased to see the new group of Police and Crime Commissioners appearing on the TV at this time. Of course, I was not, and I take a view here. Let's not panic. Let's not overreact this. Calm down, dear. What I see here is a discovery that the Police Internal Affairs Department in some areas has got a problem, that for an officer to get away with 11 separate allegations and those not be put together as a problem indicates a lack of experience, a lack of knowledge, a lack of training within that department for that point not to be picked up. Because within current legislation as it exists, such matters can be bundled up and put forward. Now, I personally would be very much more measured and not have made a statement like we've got to get rid of hundreds. Nobody knows the specific evidence in any particular case. So to make those kind of alarmist statements is very unhelpful for public confidence and the confidence of the workforce. So the first point I would make is let's be measured. Now, there's no question there are issues. And I can remember a particular case that came across my desk where I was asked to serve a misconduct letter on a particular officer for behaviour in relation to the way he spoke to female officers. And then at the same time asked to serve another one. And I turned to my staff and said, why isn't this person on a central discipline hearing and being dismissed? And it was, frankly, because of an error within the Internal Affairs Department not putting stuff together. I mean, what you're looking at in policing generally, let's take it away from that, is because of the impact of cuts, we've seen a loss of experience, a loss of leadership, and a loss of staff, and we're seeing breakdowns across the piece, including the way Internal Affairs manage their business.
All right. Donna Jones, I'll bring you back into the fray now. Are we just witnessing something that I think, not for the alleged victims, by the way, nothing will be excusable for them, but I think potentially for wider society might be a bit excusable, which is that the police do an incredibly, incredibly tough job sometimes, and then that job must take its toll, and that potentially when it comes to the kind of banter or the kind of things that they have to deal with every single day, maybe it's taking the police force a little bit longer to catch up with the very, very, very sanitised modern day-to-day corporate standards of the way you would talk to colleagues, etc. Maybe it's taking the police a little bit longer to catch up with that than it is for, say, just some happy-clappy corporate company like Ben & Jerry's, for example. Is this kind of what we're witnessing now, which is the police are getting into line, it's just taking them a bit longer than maybe they should have done?
Yeah, well, when it comes to cultural changes, policing and police forces are no different to a company. If you've got a small company that employs 100, 200 people, you bring in a new culture, a new corporate priority, it's quick to emanate down from top to bottom in the organisation. When you've got thousands of people working in a big company like Ben & Jerry's, it takes much longer. And the Met, you could go to some of your smaller forces in this country, Suffolk, Norfolk, to get some kind of change through those forces would be a lot quicker. But in the Met, it is the largest police force, like I've said, and it's like turning round Titanic. The most disappointing thing for me yesterday, yes, I mean, I read Dame Louise Casey's report on Sunday evening. I read the exec summary. I've now read the whole report. She makes some very, very sensible recommendations there. But one of the things that's the most disappointing for me, I thought Mark Rowley was excellent yesterday in putting his hands up and accepting this and accepting things need to change. The most disappointing thing for me was the person that is ultimately responsible for all of this, and that is Sadiq Khan. Where was the Mayor of London, whose job it is to deliver an effective policing service across London to keep the citizens of London safe, to make sure that women are not being raped and murdered by serving police officers? Where was he? Where was his acknowledgement of the years that he has served whilst crime has gone up under his watch? Where was he yesterday? And what's Sadiq Khan's take on this? I'm very disappointed. There was a complete absence of any comment from City Hall. It's like they've brushed their hands of it and it's nothing to do with them. Not good enough.
Donna, I suspect that'll be a popular view. Sadiq Khan, the same Sadiq Khan, of course, that didn't really condemn at all various different things like the eco-warriors, which brought our capital to a standstill. I wonder how many kids, unfortunately, were stabbed to death during that time. Police officers didn't get to the scene there because someone had glued themselves to somebody who was smashing the window at a bank or looking at that plinth of Donald Trump in a nappy that he said was OK to have there. Mark, but Kevin, I'll bring you back in as well. Kevin, I just want to bring you back in for one final word, Kevin, before I give a comment from our mayor. Kevin, do you feel as though Sadiq Khan has got some stuff to answer for here? Because he did lobby a lot of kind of racist, misogyny allegations, etc., at Cressida Dick, and now our current head of the Met has got to try and be seen to be doing something about all of this, haven't they?
Well, I would say that Sadiq Khan actually is the only police and crime commissioner, which he is, to have booted out 2 female commissioners, the fire commissioner and the police commissioner. So one always wonders quite what goes on in his head. But the key thing here about where does some blame lie? In 2004, the Morris report was published that talked a lot about internal police discipline procedures and so on. Now, we've had a lot of chief officers have come along since then, a lot of police and crime commissioners, a lot of mayors, including the Mayor of London, who's been in the seat now 5-6 years. What exactly have they done to take the learning from that? Well, that is a valid point about what has he done, other than stand there grandstanding and, frankly, kicking every day the men and women who go out to protect us. There's no question that there are some nasty people in the police and they need to be sorted out. And I take pleasure in the fact I personally have sent the most senior police officer ever to be sent to prison for misconduct, actually. But the fact of the matter is we need to be calm about this, not get carried away by the fact there's 1,100, 1,200 officers being investigated. Police is a confrontational job. If you are a villain, one of the best ways to take out a local neighbourhood officer is to get a woman on that neighbourhood to make an allegation against him of misconduct in some way. And then the villains are able to carry on with their activity. So we do need to be cautious and look at each case individually before we jump in and truly say, yes, that's a wrong one, that's a wrong one. But there is no place for wrong uns in this, and I agree with much of the comment of the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Look, both of you, thank you very much. I've thoroughly enjoyed that discussion. That is Police and Crime Commissioner for Hampshire, Donna Jones, and former Detective Chief Superintendent of the Met Police, Kevin Hurley. Do you want to just bring in a little bit of a statement here from Sadiq Khan? Because speaking after the heavily critical report by Baroness Louise Casey, the dear London Mayor, Mr Sadiq Khan, said, "We now have a commissioner who's not in denial. He's not lethargic, he's not arrogant, he's not defensive, and he takes on board with humility Dame Louise Casey's findings. I've asked him to make sure every single recommendation is taken forward. He's confirmed it will be because Londoners deserve better, but also brave, dedicated, decent police officers deserve better. That is absolutely scathing about Dame Cressida Dick, isn't it? Because by saying that Sir Mark Rowley is not those things, it does imply that his predecessor was. I can't help but wonder whether or not we could maybe hear from Sadiq Khan, but Sadiq Khan notoriously doesn't really like doing interviews with the media. Why would he, of course, when there's so much to ask him? Anyway, Sir Keir Starmer has accused Tory MPs of putting their party's interests ahead of the country's, as he claimed some secretly believe a change in power might be a good idea, i.e. that some Tory MPs think they should just give themselves the heave-ho, let Labour have a go. The Prime Minister, Liz Truss, is under increasing pressure as a snap poll of party members released this afternoon saw more than half calling for her to resign. In the next hour, we're going to be discussing whether her time in number 10 is at risk of running out. But first, earlier today, some of Liz Truss's own constituents were asked their thoughts on her premiership so far. Now, they were quite critical, OK, but here's what they had to say.
I think she's out of her depth, really. So I think just delaying the inevitable. I think she's going to have to resign.
I don't think she's ever looked really comfortable in the job, and I think she possibly knows that that's what they were intending anyway. So, but I don't think she's probably the right one. I also don't think Rishi Sunak is. I don't know who is, but I don't think they're doing a brilliant job anyway at the moment.
She looks out of the depths to me, quite frankly. Yeah. If I was her, I'd pack it in.
Well, I bet you would, right. OK, well, lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on the Just Stop Oil protest. So we've hit a few things up this hour so far. We've had whether or not you think that kids should be singing the national anthem in schools as a good sign of patriotism and maybe helping to integrate children who have either come from different countries or their parents are first-generation immigrants, etc. So I've asked you all about that. I've asked you about the Liz Truss situation. What do you make of that? Do you think that she should stick around for any longer, really? And Just Stop Oil as well. I, for the life of me, I've said it before, I'll say it again, cannot understand why those two numpties that are on top of the Dartford crossing don't just stay there. Why do we have to waste resources trying to bring them down? They clearly want to be there. They don't seem to be getting in anyone's way. Leave them. But anyway, Just Stop Oil protests. Sandra says, I think we need to get tough with these climate activists. They are making ordinary people's lives miserable. Their demands are unrealistic. I think we should stop giving them attention or a platform to speak, as you cannot reason with them. I can't help but feel as whether or not that's the nail on the head, because I think a lot of them weren't given enough attention when they were younger because their parents just sent them off to a very, very posh fee-paying boarding school and left them there, and now this is their way of being some kind of rebel. Mike says the police should be embarrassed over their handling of these protests. Their approach is contributing to the increase in vigilantes in this country. Well, I've been very critical over the police's handling of this in the past, Mike, but there is a little bit of a difference. I hear you, by the way, completely. There is a difference between just ripping the skin off someone's hand, which I personally wouldn't have any qualms doing if they've chosen to glue themselves into a road, and then doing the Macarena at a gay pride event. Those two things are a bit different, and I can understand that they don't want to end up in court, you know, with some eco-warrior accusing them of assault. But I think I take your other point, Mike, which is something I'm quite concerned about, which is that we are seeing an increasing amount of members of the public just going, screw this, I'm going to drive straight through you, or I'm going to shout at you, or I'm going to drag you off the street. And where does that end? Because I think it speaks volumes about how great the great British public are, that so far I've not seen anyone just go, all right, I'll slip it into second gear, see you in a bit. And obviously we wouldn't want to see that. But if these people are staying in the road, how long is it before that happens? Coming up, more on that poll that suggests half of Tory members want Liz Truss to resign as Prime Minister. Could we be in for blackouts this winter? And is The Crown, the Netflixy thing, disrespectful to the monarchy? Stay with me, Patrick Christys, right here on GB News Live. But before all of that, we got your weather.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Hope you're making the most of today's fine weather, because the rest of the week looking a little more mixed. It's going to stay pretty warm, actually, but there will be spells of wet and windy weather too, courtesy of this area of low pressure that's making slow but steady progress towards us. Ahead of that, we've got high pressure dominating today, which is why most places have been fine, but we're already seeing the cloud thickening and the winds picking up in the southwest. There are still one or two very scattered showers across the far northeast. For most, though, it's a fine evening, but we'll start to see that weather front bringing some showers across southwest England into parts of Wales, and by dawn, not far away from Northern Ireland. Elsewhere, though, most places will be drier. Chillier night in the far north of Scotland, but for most it'll be warmer than last night and a really quite warm night across parts of the south. This rain could be quite heavy in the morning, some big downpours, some showers across Wales extending into Northern Ireland, some bright colours there too, so again some heavy rain is likely. Gusty winds also, particularly across Wales and southwest England, getting gustier as the day goes on. A few showers for the Midlands, maybe later northwest England, but a good part of eastern England. Most of Scotland will again be dry and bright. With the breeze picking up from the North Sea, though, some of those eastern coasts will be a little chilly, whereas again in the south, warm air in place, so with a bit of sunshine. Temperatures getting into the high teens. Likely to see the rain pepping up a little more in the west as we go through the evening, and the winds getting very gusty too, particularly across parts of north and west Wales. That band of rain then marches northwards into Thursday, making for a wet start across parts of Scotland. That should tend to clear away to the north. Further showers could follow across parts of East Anglia and the southeast, but much of the west will have a dry and a brighter day on Thursday, with a bit more in the way of sunshine, and milder air is spreading northwards as well. Temperatures likely to be quite a bit higher on Thursday, again getting into the high teens across the south, and the winds will be lighter by then as well.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back, everybody. It's 4 o'clock. I wish you could see what goes on here in the breaks. And you are watching GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. Coming up, Liz Truss's battle to cling on to power after new Chancellor Jeremy Hunt tore up her economic strategy seems to be getting even harder because Tory members, the ones who actually appointed her as Prime Minister, appear to be turning on her. A snap poll of party members released earlier as she held crunch cabinet meetings saw more than half respond that she should resign. And 83% say that she was doing a bad job. Look, do you feel sorry for Liz? Do you think she's been given a rum deal? Or do you think her time in number 10 is up? And indeed, what happens next? All these questions. Also this hour, why China, I'm very angry about this, by the way, why China is trying to steal our military pilots. I suppose you could flip it on its head and say, hang on a minute, shouldn't anyone who used to be a military pilot in this country that goes over to try to help the Chinese actually be done for treason? But there we are. Former British pilots are being offered as much as £240,000 to go over to China and pass on their expertise to the Chinese military. or undermine this country's national security is another way of looking at it. Western officials are saying that attempts to headhunt pilots have been increasing recently, and up to 30 former UK military pilots are thought to have gone to China already. Is the lure a risk to national security? Yes. And Dartford crossing remains blocked for the second day in a row as the QE2 bridge was scaled by 2 Just Stop Oil protesters on Monday. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, is, I believe, near the scene, at the scene, potentially. There we go. Gosh, it was terrible when people fired fireworks at them. I don't know, it was just awful. Anyway, before that, it's the latest news.
Patrick, thank you, and good afternoon to you. The top story this hour. Cabinet ministers have been told they need to save taxpayers' money, but that public spending will continue to rise overall. Ministers left Downing Street this morning after the new Chancellor said their budgets needed to be cut. Jeremy Hunt also said cost cutting should focus on areas which would not affect public services. Public spending currently stands at around £1 trillion annually. And a new YouGov Snap poll suggests the Prime Minister Liz Truss, who's been in power for less than 6 weeks, is already facing calls to resign. It shows more than half of Tory members want her out, and more than 80% believe she's doing a bad job. Well, the Armed Forces Minister James Heappey told us the Conservatives need to get on with delivering for the country.
Whilst nobody would pretend that the last 5 or 6 weeks have been the start to her premiership she would have wanted, the reality is that, yes, a mistake was made. She went too far too fast with the mini budget as it was. But there are also a set of global economic conditions that require stability in government. There's also a security situation in Europe right now that requires stability in government. And what we must do as Conservative politicians is row in behind the Prime Minister.
Well, voters in the Prime Minister's South West Norfolk constituency say they're not convinced she'll last as leader.
I think she's out of her depth, really. So I think they're just delaying the inevitable. I think she's going to have to resign.
Well, the woman's lost the plot, and we're going to suffer for some of the stupid U-turns that have been put on upon us now.
The longer she's there, the bigger lead that the Labour Party will have.
Well, in news away from politics, the UK has summoned a Chinese diplomat over the assault of a protester at the consulate in Manchester. And a warning, if you're watching on TV, we're about to show you images of someone being attacked. The Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, is demanding an explanation after video emerged of a Hong Kong pro-democracy demonstrator being dragged onto the grounds of the consulate before being beaten by staff inside. Beijing blamed what it described a disturbing element of people illegally entering its consulate on Sunday. Police are investigating the incident. British households are being warned to prepare for blackouts in the new year. The National Grid's chief executive says they could occur on really cold weekdays between 4 and 7 o'clock in the evening in January and February. John Pettigrew issued the warning of potentially rolling blackouts out during the Financial Times Energy Transition Summit, outlining possible scenarios if generators fail to secure enough gas from continental Europe to meet demand. 26 climate protesters have been arrested after blocking a main road into West London. The Just Stop Oil campaign group disrupted traffic on the A4 this morning, blocking both carriageways near Barons Court. Police eventually removed the campaigners. Some had glued themselves to the tarmac. Meanwhile, the Dartford crossing linking Essex and Kent remains blocked for a second day after Just Stop Oil activists scaled the QE2 bridge once again. National Highways says there's about 6 miles of congestion on either side of the crossing, and it has no idea when the bridge will reopen. One of the 2 protesters has said they'll stay up there until the government cancels all new oil and gas extraction licences.
Oil and gas is killing us now, and it's driving millions into poverty this winter. So we have to have an emergency transition to renewable energy to provide us stable, affordable energy. And we've got to pay for that transition using the profits of the oil and gas industry and the rich.
Now, Russia has launched new airstrikes targeting the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. 2 people were reportedly killed when missiles hit an energy plant. Ukraine's presidential office says they've also been seeing 2 missile strikes in the southeastern city of Dnipro, causing a fire and serious damage. In the north of the country, another airstrike has left a city without water and electricity. Here, the actor Daniel Craig has been awarded the same honour held by his character, James Bond. Princess Anne presented the 007 actor with the Companion of the Order of St Michael and St George during a service at Windsor Castle. The honour recognises his contribution to film and theatre. That's it, you're up to date. You're with GB News. More news as it happens. Now back to Patrick.
Welcome back, people. Now, a defiant no from the Prime Minister's official spokesman this afternoon when asked whether her cabinet thinks she should resign as Prime Minister. A snap poll of party members, though, was released earlier, just before I came on air, actually, and it saw that more than half of people respond that she should go. 83% apparently said that she was doing a bad job. Well, at a cabinet meeting this morning, the new Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, told ministers spending cuts are coming and budgets need to be slashed. He reversed almost all of the tax measures set out in the government's mini-budget, which took place just 3 weeks ago. Energy support will be scaled back from April, higher taxes and a looming recession. Will these U-turns grow the UK economy as promised? Or have we simply not given enough time to the Prime Minister's and former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng's original growth plans? Well, of course we haven't. I mean, we didn't give them any time whatsoever, did we? But let's talk now to GB News' economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. Liam, good to have you on the show. I believe you've cycled all the way across London to be here, so thank you. That's for you, Patrick. That's dedication. But, look, I can't help but wonder, when people saw Kwarteng and Truss's initial economic outlay, they thought, gosh, this is a little bit nuts. But actually, when you've seen what Jeremy Hunt had to say in Parliament yesterday, does Hunt mean that we've all got less money in our pockets now?
Well, when the mini-budget was originally announced, nobody thought it was nuts. The CBI, the Confederation of British Industry, the Institute of Directors, the British Chamber of Commerce, they all said, well, hey, this is great because we're moving away from the highest tax burden in 70 years, tax as a share of our national income, and we're moving back to where tax was in 2020. Still pretty high by historic standards, but a little bit lower and on the way down. And the corporation tax being frozen at 19%, that's not particularly radical. It's 12.5% in the Republic of Ireland. And the top rate of tax falling from 45 to 40%. That's not particularly radical. That's what it was during the whole period that Tony Blair and Gordon Brown were in office, except for the last couple of weeks under Gordon Brown. So these weren't particularly radical policies, but taken as a whole, and because the press reaction to some of them was pretty strong, not least the top rate of tax reduction, you could say that was tin-eared, then the markets, you got into a kind of a doom loop, and there was an increasingly dramatic reaction. What Jeremy Hunt has done, in principle, Patrick, he has turned what was a £45 billion tax cut across the economy as a whole into a £32 billion tax rise. So what does that mean? What does it mean in real money? So £32 billion, £32,000 million is about 5% of tax. So the overall tax burden is increased by about 5%. So, not insignificant. And in particular, the people on the top rate of tax who are going to do a bit better, they now won't. And this energy price cap's only going to last for 6 months. And after that, it will only be more vulnerable households who get help. So again, it will be better off households who pay more, which a lot of people would say, fair enough.
But have we just done a very British thing here where the media get on a bit of a bandwagon about something, and then that rubs off to certain elements of the population, maybe when it came to some of the bankers, etc. And we end up in a situation now where we've actually decided to make a decision that, in essence, makes us all poorer and more miserable.
I think you can certainly argue, as a result of this, Hunt budget, rather than a Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng budget, that the economy is less likely to grow fast. We're less likely to avoid a recession now. Of course we are, because corporation tax is higher, and that will wipe out quite a lot of small businesses. Take 6% off the margin of pretty much any small business, that's what they live on. That's
Liam, why is
everything.
this good and what Kwarteng wanted to do bad? I know I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed when it comes to the economy, but please explain this.
I haven't been saying it is a good move. I've been almost an outlier in saying, actually, these mini-budget proposals... I mean, what I've said, and I've written it 2 or 3 weekends in a row in the Telegraph, I've said it many times here on GB News, the policies themselves were good policies, right? The handling and the presentation and the timing of the policies was politically tin-eared, ill-judged, maybe even inept. And it was. It is inept to lift the ban on bankers' bonuses and lower the top rate of tax as we're going into winter where a lot of people are scared about paying their bills. That's inept. You should have done that when the population was feeling a bit more flush. It is maybe a bit inept to lift the cap on bankers' bonuses just because you want to throw a bit of red meat to your Tory donors, just because you become Prime Minister. And I think Liz Truss realises that she got a bit hasty and tries to do a bit too much too soon. Even Margaret Thatcher, who she sometimes models herself on, I remember back in the early 80s, she filled her cabinet with people who disagreed with her. We had the dries, the sort of Thatcherites, and the wets. That was the vernacular back then. And it took her 2 or 3 or 4 years in office to start doing the more radical stuff that genuinely changed the country. It seems now Liz Truss may not have 2 or 3 or 4 months, let alone 2 or 3 or 4 years, because I don't think the sort of One Nation side of the party, I don't think the likes of Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak and their lieutenants in Parliament are going to stop until she's run out of office.
Yeah, I think it's pretty bleak, actually. And also, I would like to point out as well that I did have something in my eye. I wasn't actually crying over Jeremy Hunt's budget, which I think it looked like, unlike many of us might be doing when we have to pay our energy bills. But, Liam, thank you very, very much. Liam Halligan there, our economics and business editor with On the Money. Right, OK, loads for us to still get stuck into here. What do people outside the Westminster bubble actually think about our Prime Minister? GB News' East Midlands reporter Will Hollis has been in Nuneaton today, speaking to voters, getting their thoughts on Liz Truss. And he joins me this afternoon. Will, thank you very much. What's the mood been like where you are?
Good afternoon. Yeah, sometimes with a story like this, you can get bogged down in the numbers, you can get bogged down with the politicians, and I think you can get a real idea of how voters would be voting in a general election if you could actually get out onto a high street just like this one in Nuneaton in the West Midlands, quite close to Leicestershire's border here in Warwickshire. Nuneaton is one of these places called a bellwether area because however this area votes, it tends to be quite in line with how the national picture is. So in 1997, it followed that Labour line and then voted with Labour and Tony Blair and Gordon Brown right until 2010 when it was David Cameron, Conservative MP Marcus Jones. So right now, this is the kind of place where you can get an idea of how people feel. Right now, it's a 13,000 seat majority in favour of the Conservatives, but you wouldn't think that from the conversations that I've been having with people on the street this morning.
Well, I did vote Conservative the last election. However, I am teetering on changing to another party because I think they're a bit of a shambles at the minute.
She's made a right hash of her policy-making decisions with Kwasi. And for Mr Hunt to come in and totally undo the whole thing just goes to show that she's came in like a bull in a china shop and caused more harm than good.
Oh, come on, look at the mess that we're in at the moment. Everything's rising, prices are rising, gas, electric. Who knows where we're going to end up?
It's quite clear she's toast. It's just a matter of time now. And sadly, it's just knocked everyone. If you've got a mortgage, to hell.
I don't think she's doing a very good job. I think she needs to be for more the people than, you know, get them taking stuff off them.
I actually think she's all right. I think she might make some changes, considering what's been going on with Brexit, with the COVID.
If there was an election fairly soon, I would vote Labour because I've always voted Conservative. But just on the history of what they're doing with society at the moment is disgusting. You know, so I wouldn't vote for them again.
Yes, well, obviously, it's 2 years away from that allotted election in 2024. So quite a wee while away, and the opinions that you might have heard today might not translate into votes, Patrick.
It is absolutely brilliant to get out of that Westminster bubble and get to places like Nuneaton. We are the People's Channel, so we like to go out and actually talk to the people. But the head of the National Grid has issued warnings that Britain could experience energy blackouts. Now, if you are just tuning in, ladies and gentlemen, this is how I had to find out that I think my TV career is over, because supposedly these energy blackouts are going to take place between the hours of 4 and 7 p.m. Bearing in mind that my show is 3 till 6 p.m, it doesn't bode well for GB News Live, but there we go. On weekdays, during really, really cold days in January and February, if electricity generators do not have enough gas to meet demand, it is possible that gas shortages could arise this winter as the supply of gas in European countries continues to be threatened by Russia's war in Ukraine. And in more worrying news, energy bills could soar again from April, as yesterday Jeremy Hunt, cheers Jeremy, announced that the energy price guarantee would come to an end in the spring. Joining me now is the Director of Policy, Government and Public Affairs at UK Onshore Oil and Gas. It's Charles McAllister. Charles, thank you very much. Blackouts this winter, really?
Yeah, I mean, there is a real possibility. If you look at the Security of Supply report from last year, they basically said, Ofgem said there was no real risk. Fast forward 9-10 months. Real risk. If it's OK, I'm going to split it between gas and electricity.
Do you think, mate? Do you think?
So, because the Russians have cut off supply, Europe is competing with countries all around the world from a limited number of liquefied natural gas suppliers. So that pushes the price up and also means there isn't enough to go around. So there's a real risk that the UK will not have enough gas. So that will impact heavy industry first. They'll be shut down. That is very likely, I would say. If they're shut down and we still don't have enough, then it'll go to the electricity stations, the combined capture electricity gas-fired power stations. If those go down, then we're into blackout territory. I think a big risk as well here is National Grid are assuming that we will continue to get electricity from Norway and from France. Now, Norway's hydro capacity is way down because it hasn't rained enough. And in France, their nuclear power capacity is down by almost 60%, combined with the fact that there are also strikes in France as well. So it basically reveals this dangerous situation of over-reliance on energy imports.
Well, this is it, isn't it? So we can't exactly fill the void with solar, especially considering it will be winter when this is happening. We're going to have to rely on the French not being on strike, which traditionally has not worked out that well, and it raining more in Norway, as opposed to maybe using some of our own resources.
Absolutely. Well, you see, this winter, there is nothing that can be done from a new infrastructure perspective. We have to make do with what we have, hence why there are calls for us to cut demand, for example. But absolutely, I mean, last year we produced the least amount of energy in the UK for 50 years, totally unacceptable.
Why?
Good question. Bureaucracy, not being able to build enough, not enough support for the oil and gas industry, I would say. Because, I mean, my view is we need to produce as much energy as humanly possible, thermal and renewable. But you see, in terms of delivering amount of energy in the least amount of time with the least amount of land, you know what the best technology is. It's fracking.
Yeah, well, and this is it. And I would just like to make the point again. There seems to be a lot of really fascinating resistance from people usually wearing orange vests and halfway up the Dartford crossing, saying this will be terrible and that local people in local communities, rural areas, wouldn't want you fracking anywhere near their homes. But actually, is that true? Because I think when they know what options are available to them, i.e. some financial incentives, they might change their mind.
Well, if we continue down the business as usual approach and go for imports, there'll be no money for local people. When we produce shale gas domestically, we've already had the system set up for years. So for one shale gas exploration site, which we could have up and running very quickly, £100,000 goes to the local community, dispersed among the local community. Now, when polling was done by one of the companies in Lancashire, they asked the local area, would you like that to go towards local community projects or would you like a cheque? Guess what 80% of people said? We'll take a cheque.
Yeah, of course.
I would as well.
Absolutely.
So that's what we can do with that. And then if we move to a production site, then our revenue model kicks in. So we'll give a share of revenue to the local community. Now, at current gas prices for a 40-well site, we're talking community benefits of £400 million.
So some, just so I've got this right, some towns in Lancashire could just have villages could have like 400 million quid.
So worst case scenario, 4 million. Best case scenario, 400 million.
If the worst case scenario is 4 million, I think I'll take my chances with that one. But
Absolutely.
look, thank you very much. And it's great to have you on the show because I don't think this tends to get the airing in a lot of other news outlets, really, that potentially it should. There's a lot of coverage, a huge amount of coverage of people like Just Stop Oil and whatever they're up to. And yeah, OK, because it's an inconvenience, but why not put a bit of the other side of it as well? Thank you very much, Charles. Charles McAllister, who is the Director of Policy, Government and Public Affairs at UK Onshore Oil and Gas. Just out of interest, now you've heard what you've had to say there, I don't know whether or not you are particularly pro-fracking at home or if you're listening in your car or watching online or whatever you're doing, right? But actually, would you take your share of 4 million quid or 400 million quid? Would you become a lot more pro-fracking if that was the case? I strongly suspect that you might. I certainly would, but maybe you've got your principles. I don't know about that. It's GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. Coming up, why China, talking to people who haven't got any principles, why China is trying to steal our military pilots. Former British pilots are being offered as much as £240,000 to go over to China. And it says here, pass on their expertise to the Chinese military. I would argue betray this nation. But is the law a risk to national security? Yes. First, though, it's your weather.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Hope you're making the most of today's fine weather because the rest of the week looking a little more mixed. It's going to stay pretty warm actually, but there will be spells of wet and windy weather too, courtesy of this area of low pressure that's making slow but steady progress towards us. Ahead of that, we've got high pressure dominating today, which is why most places have been fine, but we're already seeing the cloud thickening and the winds picking up in the southwest. There are still one or two very scattered showers across the far northeast. For most, though, it's a fine evening, but we'll start to see that weather front bringing some showers across southwest England into parts of Wales and by dawn, not far away from Northern Ireland. Elsewhere, though, most places will be drier. Chillier night in the far north of Scotland, but for most it'll be warmer than last night and a really quite warm night across parts of the south. This rain could be quite heavy in the morning, some big downpours, some showers across Wales extending into Northern Ireland, some bright colours there too, so again some heavy rain is likely. Gusty winds also, particularly across Wales and southwest England, getting gustier as the day goes on. A few showers for the Midlands, maybe later northwest England, but a good part of eastern England. Most of Scotland will again be dry and bright. With the breeze picking up from the North Sea, though, some of those eastern coasts will be a little chilly, whereas again in the south, warm air in place, so with a bit of sunshine. Temperatures getting into the high teens. Likely to see the rain pepping up a little more in the west as we go through the evening, and the winds getting very gusty too, particularly across parts of north and west Wales. That band of rain then marches northwards into Thursday, making for a wet start across parts of Scotland. That should tend to clear away to the north. Further showers could follow across parts of East Anglia and the southeast, but much of the west will have a drier and a brighter day on Thursday with a bit more in the way of sunshine, and milder air is spreading northwards as well. Temperatures likely to be quite a bit higher on Thursday, again getting into the high teens across the south, and the winds will be lighter by then as well.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Yeah, welcome back, everybody. Now, later in the show, we'll be discussing whether children should be taught the national anthem in schools. Should they sing it as well? There's not much point learning it if you don't sing it out, to be honest with you. But the chair of Social Mobility Commission is calling on all school children to be taught the national anthem or risk being taught that they, quote, don't belong in their own country. This is Catherine Birbalsingh, who's a bit of a favourite here on GB News, it must be said. She also said that teachers should make sure ethnic minority children learn the anthem, even if it, quotes, makes the teachers feel uncomfortable. So there's quite a lot to get stuck into here. I mean, look, basically the crux of it is, do you think that learning the national anthem is something that children should just do? Is it a natural patriotic thing? I suppose singing it every morning in class is a different thing, but maybe you agree with that as well. But the other element of this, which Catherine Birbalsingh has been alluding to, is we do have a lot of people in this country, of course, who are either immigrants themselves or first-generation immigrants whose children are at school, etc. Would it be a good thing for integration, really, or a unifying national identity if all of those children learnt the national anthem? What do you make of it? GBViews at gbnews.uk. But I thought, OK, I need to get to the bottom of this. So where do I go in Britain to find something both deeply patriotic but also full of tourists, i.e. people from other countries who could have a view on whether or not foreign children in our schools should be learning the national anthem? Well, there really is only one place for it, and that is Buckingham Palace. Let's find out what people said.
I think it's an important thing to learn the national anthem from young age, because it's a national thing and you should have the patriot in your heart from young age.
We sang God Save the Queen in Canada until probably the late 60s. So
in school?
In school, God Save the Queen.
Really?
At our assemblies, yeah. Yes. And we had a picture of the Queen on our wall.
And was that nice?
Yes, we
didn't mind it at all. It didn't hurt us in any way.
They should, probably.
Why?
Well, it's a kind of, English heritage and all that, so they should learn that very much.
In America, I don't remember ever being forced to sing it, so I guess my instinct would be to say you shouldn't be forced to do it, I guess.
Do you think they should be at least made to learn it?
Sure. I don't see anything wrong with that. It seems perfectly logical to me.
I'm Australian.
Yeah.
I don't like our national anthem,
really?
so yeah.
Why not?
Oh, because I don't
know. Bad
it's
tune.
old. Yeah, the tune's even not that bad, but it's just old.
Do you know the Australian national anthem?
Yes.
Do you want to sing a little bit of it?
Okay. Australians, oh, let us rejoice in history's pace. Let every stage to advance Australia fair.
Well done, fantastic. Oh, well done. You get a high five for that. You love to see it, people. You love to see it. All right, what do you make of this? I actually decided to run a little Twitter poll of my own. At Patrick Christys is my Twitter handle, so you can check that out. Would you be happy for children to learn the national anthem and sing it in school every morning? So far, nearly 4,000 of you voted on it. 70% say yes. 30% of you say no. I mean, I don't see what the problem is. I do find it ridiculous, realistically, though, that if you think about that and really break it down, what I did there was interview a load of people who are not from this country. So there was some that unfortunately didn't make the cut as well. We had a wonderful Polish couple and a few people from various different nationalities as well. I was just asking them whether or not they thought there was anything wrong with people who live in this country and are born in this country and go to school in this country being taught our own national anthem. And they all looked at me like I was mad, right? They all looked at me like, well, no, of course, there's nothing wrong with that. Why is it, a lot of the time, just British people who think that there's something inherently wrong about teaching other British people our national anthem? It's like we're being offended on other people's behalf, but they're not offended by it. Anyway, GBViews at GBnews.uk. You can tweet us at GBnews. Coming up, is there a line that eco-protesters aren't willing to cross? The line from wherever they are into the shower, I think. But anyway, it appears not, as Dartford crossing remains blocked for the second day in a row, as the QE2 bridge was scaled by two Just Stop Oil protesters. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, will be there bringing us the latest. Apparently, they're not going to reopen the bridge until these people come down. Why don't we just leave them up there, open the bridge, and they have to accept their consequences if anything bad happens? But first, it's your latest headlines.
Thank you, Patrick. The headlines this hour. Cabinet ministers have been told they need to save taxpayers' money, but that public spending will continue to rise overall. Ministers left Downing Street this morning after the new Chancellor said their budgets needed to be cut. Jeremy Hunt also says cost-cutting should focus on areas which will not affect public services. Public spending currently stands at around £1 trillion every year. British households are being warned to prepare for potential blackouts in the new year. National Grid's chief executive said the power cuts could happen on really cold weekdays in January and February between 4 and 7 p.m. John Pettigrew issued the blackout warning during the Financial Times Energy Transition Summit as he outlined what might happen if generators fail to secure enough gas from Europe to meet UK demand. The UK has summoned China's chargé d'affaires over the assault of a protester at the Chinese consulate in Manchester. And a warning, if you're watching on TV, we're about to show images of a person being attacked. The Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, is demanding an explanation after video emerged of a Hong Kong pro-democracy demonstrator being dragged into the grounds of the consulate before then being beaten up. Beijing has blamed what it describes as a disturbing element illegally entering its consulate on Sunday. Police say they're investigating the incident. Auctioneers in Edinburgh say they are flabbergasted by the huge interest being shown in a print reproduction of Balmoral Castle painted by the King. His Majesty's prints usually sell for around £400 to £600, but this particular painting from 2001 has sparked international interest and is expected to fetch much more. It's thought to be the first time a print by a reigning monarch has been auctioned, and it'll be open to bidding on Thursday. That's it. You're up to date on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. You're with GB News, the People's Channel. Don't go anywhere. We're back in just a moment.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Faraday.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back, everybody. Now, MPs are debating new offences and tougher police powers this afternoon that would help tackle what the government says are guerrilla tactics by some of these environment and climate activists. It comes as the Dartford crossing remains blocked for a second day as Just Stop Oil protests continued. The QE2 bridge, which links Kent and Essex, has been closed since it was scaled by two climbers from the group on Monday. The climate activist group wants the government to, well, just stop oil, obviously, but halt all new oil and gas licences. Says that the climbers will stay on top of the bridge until they are, quote, brought down. I made the point earlier that why don't we just open the bridge and leave them up there? And then somebody said to me, well, I suppose if one of them falls off and you die, how do you feel about it? And yeah, I'm not sure I really want to be a martyr to the oil and gas industry, but meanwhile, around 30 Just Stop Oil activists also caused traffic disruption in West London this morning, blocking a main road during rush hour. When will it end? When will it end? These are just the latest in a series of protests that have taken place in the last couple of weeks. I, for one, am deeply concerned that the British public are just going to start taking matters into their own hands and all of a sudden streets of London start to sound a bit like the opening theme tune to EastEnders. But let's get more on this from our Home and Security editor, Mark White, who is in West London for us. Mark, there is realistically no sign of this stopping. I understand actually you've got some breaking news for us, is that right?
Yes, with regard to the protest on the QE2 bridge, Essex Police have just issued a statement saying that an aerial platform at height is due to arrive imminently on the bridge, and that will enable officers to work at height to be able to try to speak to the two protesters who are now up there, of course, for a second day to try to persuade them to come down. But of course, at the end of the day, if they don't want to come down, they're not going to get involved in grappling with them at height. That's just far too dangerous. Chief Superintendent Simon Anslow from Essex Police issued a statement saying that the two people who remain at height on the bridge have put themselves in danger. He goes on to say, as a result, we and the emergency services face a considerable challenge. Our priority is to keep our county moving, but we also have a duty of care to the two people, as well as those who may be involved in any resolution at height. And he goes on to say, I know this situation is incredibly frustrating, but we are doing everything possible to resolve the situation as quickly and safely as possible. As I say, I mean, it's very difficult. You don't want to put members of the emergency services at risk by going up there and getting into any physical confrontation with people high up on a bridge like that. So it's a matter of trying to cajole and persuade them to come down. But at the end of the day, these protesters, Patrick, are only going to come down when they feel they're good and ready to do that. Once they've made their point, they feel cold, tired and hungry, that's when they'll come down. Essex Police say that when they do come down, they will be immediately arrested.
I just can't help but wonder, Mark, when you think about all of the police resources that are going into not just these two up this bridge now, but on the various different streets around London and wherever else in the country they want to glue themselves. Is there a case for things like wasting police time and police resources? I mean, I don't know, but it's got to be getting to that stage, hasn't it? Certainly if we're about to send a couple of police officers up a bridge.
Well, there's no doubt this is wasting police time and resources. It absolutely is. Yesterday in Victoria Street, the protest I was at, I counted 50 plus police officers who were there for over 2 hours. Again this morning, 50 plus police officers here for 2 hours dealing with the protesters here. Dozens of police and emergency services on the QE2 bridge over in Dartford as well. It's tying them up when they want to be going about their normal day-to-day business of trying to keep people safe in the capital and elsewhere. When you speak to these eco-protesters, of course, they claim that they've got right on their side. It's a climate emergency and they're justified in doing what they're doing. So they're not going to be dissuaded from that. What is left then is an option for the government to try to introduce stiffer penalties for those who cause this kind of disruption. That's why we are now getting the Home Secretary introducing new legislation into Parliament in the hope of getting that legislation through, which will mean possible jail terms for those who breach injunctions. Injunctions will be issued banning protesters from carrying out protests in a certain area. If they breach that, then they risk jail. It happened, remember, about a year ago with Insulate Britain. It took a while for those injunctions being breached and then for that to go back to the courts. But eventually they were handed jail terms and it did have an effect. But of course, Insulate Britain have gone quiet. But in their place is Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil.
Mark, thank you very much. As always, Mark White there, who is in West London. And that news that you just brought us is that police are going to make an attempt to go up that bridge and chat to the people who decided to, well, essentially shackle themselves to the top of the QE2 bridge and bring the Dartford crossing to a standstill. Anyway, China is luring former British military pilots overseas, yes, you heard that right, to train up and pass on their expertise to the Chinese military. Reports suggest they're being offered up to £240,000. Western officials are saying that attempts to headhunt pilots have been increasing recently, and up to 30 former UK military pilots are thought to have already gone to China, which I find deeply, deeply concerning. A spokesperson for the Ministry of Defence has said that training and recruiting the pilots does not breach any of the UK laws, but the UK is issuing an intelligence alert to warn former military pilots against training members of China's People's Liberation Army. I mean, for goodness sake. Let's talk now to Professor Steve Sang, who's the Director of China Institute at the SOAS University of London. Thank you very much. Which is one of the world's leading institutions for the study of Asia, Africa and the Middle East. Forgive me for saying this, but this surely poses a massive threat to our national security, Professor Steve.
Well, I think it is incredibly naive on the part of the pilots who joined the Chinese Air Force for that training. I mean, the first thing they need to know is that they are not joining just the Chinese Air Force. They are joining the air arm of the military wing of the Chinese Communist Party. The PLA is the Communist Party's military wing. It's not China's National Defense Forces.
Just explain to me the difference in that then. So if I'm a British pilot and I'm in this country, a former British military pilot, and I decide to go over there to China, I am training people who are potentially about to invade Taiwan?
Yes, I think that is exactly what it is all about. I don't think we are talking about British pilots training Chinese pilots how to fly Chinese jets. We are talking about British pilots sharing with Chinese pilots the way how NATO Air Force operate, and therefore potentially how NATO pilots, including American pilots, who might get involved with China over Taiwan, might end up being shot down.
That's fascinating, because from where I'm sitting, that sounds a lot like it might be treason.
Well, I think the UK is incredibly relaxed in a lot of legal regulations. So it really would not surprise me that they would not have broken any law. I think the only law that I think potentially they might have broken would have been the Official Secrets Act, because all the information they acquired including how US or other NATO air force operate and their tactical maneuvers, would have been acquired in their service as members of the RAF or other military services. And those information would have been covered by the Official Secrets Act, and they should not be sharing them in or after their active service.
Can I just say, it does appear to... Why would China be wanting to do this if it wasn't planning at some point on maybe engaging militarily with NATO, which implies to me as though they are really planning, essentially, maybe to kickstart World War III?
I don't think the Chinese are really planning to start World War III. I don't think anybody in the world wants to start World War III, because that is something that is going to wipe us out as the human race as a whole. But nobody really try to start wars like that. It is the kind of operations that slowly escalate and eventually get out of hands. And the reality is that the Chinese government under Xi Jinping will do whatever it takes in order to take Taiwan, and the Americans are very unlikely to simply lay back and let that happen. So the risk of Chinese pilots shooting at American pilots and any other allied nations of the United States who may be helping the Americans is a real risk. And this is something perhaps some of those former pilots have not considered.
Is Britain's only solution just to pay them more money not to go and work with the Chinese government?
I think there is an element of appealing to their sense of what is right. I mean, if they are aware that they are training people who are going to kill younger pilots who are coming after them, I don't think they would necessarily have been tempted simply by the offer of a bucket load of cash.
That's fascinating stuff. Look, thank you very much for making the time for us. Professor Steve Zhang there, who is the Director of China Institute at SOAS University of London, which is one of the world's leading institutions for the study of Asia, Africa and the Middle East. Well, the Ministry of Defence has said that it was working to make it much harder for China to poach British military talent. I must say, I find this incredibly surprising on numerous fronts, the idea that anyone really who has worked as part of the British military, essentially taken an oath, one would assume, really, to this country and to our monarch and our fair land, that would go over and work with the Chinese. They must know, they must go into it with their eyes wide open, that I don't really think the Chinese government particularly wishes us, or indeed the Western world, well. But there we go. Anyway, moving on from that, it's been reported today that, to another abomination, been reported today that an £88 million Netflix series on Harry and Meghan has been delayed until next year after producers were spooked by a backlash against the Crown. The former Prime Minister, Sir John Major, heavily criticised the series, claiming it's damaging, malicious fiction. Well, it's because the new series of the show will reportedly include a scene where Charles, then the Prince of Wales, played by Dominic West, briefs the Prime Minister against the Queen in a bid to replace her. That's despite the fact that Sir John claims he was never approached by the makers of the series to fact-check any script material. Netflix openly admit the show is a dramatisation of real events. But I want to ask if its representation of history is disrespectful, frankly, to our royal family. Joining me now is the royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams. Richard, it's all very well and good, the Crown going, look, this is a dramatisation of real events. But it doesn't have a big flashing warning light about exactly which bits have been dramatised, Richard, because some of it is, you know, pretty much bob on, and then you end up with certain things, like essentially the then Prince Charles trying to launch a soft coup against his mother, for example, which I can only hope is not true. They don't have a big warning sign before that saying this is a load of rubbish, do they?
Well, firstly, we will all have, apparently, a chance to view it on the 9th of November. I'm afraid nothing in this planet would persuade Netflix to postpone it. But the answer to your question is very important. No, they don't have a disclaimer, and it's so slick, and the production values are so good, a large number of people will think that what is shown actually happened. In the case, for example, of Sir John Major, who's absolutely outraged, as well he might be, supposedly the fictional Prince Charles, played by Dominic West. When we saw Prince Charles in the last series, played by Josh O'Connor, he was a spineless, idiotic whoop. And so, I mean, it gives you an idea of the way they can portray members of the royal family. But the point is, this never happened. There was a poll which showed 47% of people at some point thought that the Queen might consider abdication. It certainly didn't or did not add up to what the Crown decided to make it. And the fact that no such conversation either took place or could have taken place, the Majors make derogatory comments about the royals. But I mean, it's not just that. Throughout the series, including a particularly obscene episode which showed the Duke of Edinburgh's pregnant sister, who died tragically in an air crash that had nothing to do with him at all in 1936, because of a supposed misdemeanor, pure invention at Gordonston. They don't spend the time together, so she goes on the flight, and then he's thrown out of the reception after the funeral by his father and blamed. It's that sort of thing.
I get that. It's a lot of, there's a load of absolute tosh in there. I understand all of that. I'm just going to bring in our entertainment reporter, Ellie Phillips. Ellie, what I find absolutely remarkable is that Harry and Meghan, they care so much about truth bombs and all of this stuff, but The Crown is on Netflix. Harry and Meghan have got a deal with Netflix. Why would they want to work with a company that is essentially just making stuff up about his grandmother and that side of the family?
It comes down to money, essentially. Netflix are paying them an absolute whack to have their documentary, which is apparently being pushed back because they're worried about how soon it will come out after the Queen's death. However, I do disagree with the assertion that there's no warning on The Crown. It's not necessarily a warning, but the log line for the programme describes it as fictional drama based on historical events. So it is a fictional drama. I don't think it's Netflix's duty to be educating the public about the history of our country. I think if people are believing fiction to be fact, that speaks to a wider issue. It's poetic license. You know, no one is privy to the conversations that happened between John Major and the Queen and Charles or anyone. Those conversations between
is it not tricky though, because they're using real people, right? So if it was John Major and Schminch Charles or whatever, then you could maybe say fine, but it's not. It's like this is John Major, this is Prince Charles. Go on.
Yeah, I totally get where you're coming from. However, like I said, they've said that these conversations are fictional. They're very clear about that. And I mean, you look at any kind of reenactment of things that have happened in history. Look at the Pam and Tommy, film that was on Hulu. They said, oh, well, some of those things didn't happen. Well, again, it's fiction based on historical events. And I think you're going to have that. It's the Crown. They want entertainment. They want to spice things up. Okay. And they may not be factually correct, but they're entertaining. And it is an entertainment programme.
All right, Richard, I can see you're itching to get involved.
Well, it's a matter when you have very sensitive matter, and I think a gross distortion of our freedoms, that in fact they use real people, living people. The dead can't sue, after all. They know perfectly well the royal family is not going to sue. There's no disclaimer, which would, I think, be extremely helpful, and they take grotesque liberties. I think there's no question also that King Charles and Queen Consort Camilla will be very concerned with what is shown and how it is shown in this documentary. And so far as the intention of the series, which began on one note with a superb cast and the balance that Peter Morgan, its creator, showed in The Queen, then it suddenly switched when Claire Foy became Queen, became Olivia Colman, who was sullen and cold, and every single member of the royal family in the last series was snobbish, nasty. You wouldn't want them in the house. They joined the mafia. That's the message of the series. And the problem also is that people, for example, who would expect to see the attempted kidnapping of Princess Anne or the shots fired at the Queen and show the bravery there, they won't see them because this is an anti-monarchist tract.
Well, there you go. And I suppose it's all very well and good having a Hollywood-style licence, but, you know, it is our royal family at the end of the day. But maybe that's why Harry and Meghan feel so at home there, because it's just a load of Hollywood nonsense. Thank you very much, both of you. Richard Fitzwilliams, who's joining me, royal commentator, and as well, the wonderful entertainment reporter, Ellie Phillips. We could have cracked on with that for a bit longer, couldn't we? But, of course, we have to move things on. Stay with me there. Patrick Christys right here on GB News Live. Lots more to come in the final hour of this programme. Goodness me, where are the first 2 hours gone? Can Liz Truss survive as Prime Minister? Do you want her to? Could we face power cuts? That's right. Have you, by the way, been saddened and shocked to find out that the power cuts are due to take place during the timings of this show? It's a coup, it's a coup. But anyway, should we also teach the national anthem and make it mandatory in secondary schools? Don't go anywhere. Before that, it's your weather.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Hope you're making the most of today's fine weather, because the rest of the week looking a little more mixed. It's going to stay pretty warm, actually, but there will be spells of wet and windy weather too, courtesy of this area of low pressure that's making slow but steady progress towards us. Ahead of that, we've got high pressure dominating today, which is why most places have been fine, but we're already seeing the cloud thickening and the winds picking up in the southwest. There are still 1 or 2 very scattered showers across the far northeast. For most, though, it's a fine evening, but we'll start to see that weather front bringing some showers across southwest England into parts of Wales, and by dawn, not far away from Northern Ireland. Elsewhere, though, most places will be drier. Chillier night in the far north of Scotland, but for most it'll be warmer than last night, and a really quite warm night across parts of the south. This rain could be quite heavy in the morning, some big downpours, some showers across Wales extending into Northern Ireland, some bright colours there too, so again some heavy rain is likely. Gusty winds also, particularly across Wales and southwest England, getting gustier as the day goes on. A few showers for the Midlands, maybe later northwest England, but a good part of eastern England. Most of Scotland will again be dry and bright. With the breeze picking up from the North Sea, though, some of those eastern coasts will be a little chilly, whereas again in the south, warm air in place, so with a bit of sunshine. Temperatures getting into the high teens. Likely to see the rain pepping up a little more in the west as we go through the evening, and the winds getting very gusty too, particularly across parts of north and west Wales. That band of rain then marches northwards into Thursday, making for a wet start across parts of Scotland. That should tend to clear away to the north. Further showers could follow across parts of East Anglia and the southeast, but much of the west will have a drier and a brighter day on Thursday, with a bit more in the way of sunshine, and milder air is spreading northwards as well. Temperatures likely to be quite a bit higher on Thursday, again getting into the high teens across the south, and the winds will be lighter by then as well.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good afternoon, welcome back and welcome to GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm with you all the way through until 6 p.m. Coming up, we'll be looking at the Prime Minister's position. This afternoon, a fresh YouGov poll revealed 55% of Tory party members think that Liz Truss should go, while a majority would vote for Rishi Sunak. Good grief. If the leadership election were to be rerun, a dream ticket of Sunak and Hunt, eh? There's accusations that her new Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, is the one really pulling the strings after he introduced a raft of measures, effectively scrapping most of the tax cuts introduced in the so-called mini-budget. So, can she hold on to power? Is she on the way out? Also, it turns out that a lot of people would quite like Boris Johnson back. Where do you stand on all of that? Another symptom of fiscal statement U-turns is that households can now face energy bills soaring to an average of £5,000 a year in April. We had our fabulous economics and business editor Liam Halligan on earlier, who, a bit like me, is absolutely scratching his head to understand why this budget, which appears to make us all a bit poorer, is better than the last budget, which might have made us all a bit richer. Anyway, the government scheme to guarantee average household bills won't exceed £2,500, easy for me to say, has been cut from lasting 2 years. There will now be a review to determine what the government will do to support the most vulnerable households from spring onwards. The warning comes as National Grid claim the UK could see blackouts between 4 till 7 p.m, which, let's be honest, is terrible news for this show on weekdays during the colder months. So, could the lights go out this winter? We'll find out later on in the show. I've also just had an email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, from a man called Christopher saying that he loves me. Why is it never Jennifer Aniston? Here's your latest news.
Patrick, thank you. Good afternoon to you. Cabinet ministers have been told they need to save taxpayers' money, but that public spending will continue to rise overall. Ministers left Downing Street this morning after the new Chancellor said their budgets needed to be cut. Jeremy Hunt says cost cutting should focus, though, on areas which will not affect public services. Public spending currently stands at around £1 trillion a year. Well, a new poll suggests Prime Minister Liz Truss, who's been in power for less than 6 weeks, is already facing calls to resign. The YouGov research showing that more than half of Tory members want Liz Truss to leave and more than 80% believe she's doing a bad job. The Armed Forces Minister James Heappey told GB News the Conservatives need to get on with delivering for the country.
Nobody would pretend that the last 5 or 6 weeks have been the start to her premiership she would have wanted. The reality is that, yes, a mistake was made. She went too far too fast with the mini-budget as it was. But there are also a set of global economic conditions that require stability in government. There's also a security situation in Europe right now that requires stability in government. And what we must do as Conservative politicians is row in behind the Prime Minister.
Well, we've been asking voters in the Prime Minister's own South West Norfolk constituency, and they're not convinced she'll last as leader.
I think she's out of her depth, really. So I think just delaying the inevitable. I think she's going to have to resign.
Well, the woman's lost the plot, and we're going to suffer for some of the stupid U-turns that have been put upon us now.
The longer she's there, the bigger lead that the Labour Party will have.
In other news, the UK has summoned China's chargé d'affaires over the assault of a protester at the consulate in Manchester. A warning, if you're watching on TV, we're about to show you images of the person being attacked. Well, the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, is demanding an explanation for what happened after video emerged of a Hong Kong pro-democracy demonstrator being dragged into the grounds of the Chinese consulate in Manchester before being manhandled and then beaten. Beijing has blamed what it described as a disturbing element illegally entering its consulate on Sunday. Police are investigating the incident. British households are being warned to prepare for blackouts and potentially cold homes in the new year. National Grid's chief executive says the power cuts could potentially happen on really cold weekdays in January and February between 4 and 7 p.m. John Pettigrew issued the blackout warnings during the Financial Times' Energy Transmission Summit as he outlined what might happen if generators fail to secure enough gas from Europe to meet UK demand. Meanwhile, 26 climate protesters have been arrested after blocking a main road into West London. Just Stop oil activists disrupted traffic on the A4 this morning, blocking both carriageways near Barons Court. Police eventually managed to remove them, even though some had glued themselves to the tarmac. But the Dartford crossing linking Essex and Kent remains blocked for a second day. Just Stop oil activists there scaling the QE2 bridge again. National Highways saying there's about 6 miles of congestion on either side of the crossing still, and it can't guess when the bridge will reopen. One protester has said they'd stay up there until the government cancels all new oil and gas extraction licences.
It's killing us now, and it's driving millions into poverty this winter. So we have to have an emergency transition to renewable energy to provide us stable, affordable energy. And we've got to pay for that transition using the profits of the oil and gas industry and the rich.
Now, Russia has launched new airstrikes targeting the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. 2 people were reportedly killed when missiles hit an energy plant. Ukraine says there have also been 2 missile strikes in the southeastern city of Dnipro, causing a fire and serious damage. In the north of the country, another airstrike has left a city without water or electricity. Here, the actor Daniel Craig has been awarded the same honour held by the character he plays on screen, James Bond. Princess Anne presented the 007 actor with the Companion of the Order of St Michael and St George during a service at Windsor Castle. The honour recognises Craig's outstanding contribution to film and theatre. Congratulations to him. You're with GB News. More news as it happens. Now back to Patrick.
Welcome back, everybody. Now, Liz Truss's premiership is coming under increasing pressure as today a snap poll of Tory party members found more than half say that she should resign as Prime Minister, with, you guessed it, Boris Johnson their top choice of successor. I can't help but feel as though we're in a situation at the moment where our Prime Minister was only elected by some Conservative Party members, and actually now potentially we have a chap running the country who nobody is elected at all, but there we are. There's also suggestions that her popularity with older voters could be under threat, as Downing Street indicated that ministers could ditch their commitment to the triple lock on pensions. It follows a U-turn on almost all of the tax-cutting measures announced in her mini-budget and her sacking of Kwasi Kwarteng as Chancellor last week after just a month in post. But I'm sure we'll all be reassured to know that it's calmed the markets. I mean, we'll all be a bit poorer, but it will be reassured to know that we've calmed the market. GB News political editor Darren McCaffrey is in Westminster for us right now. Darren, did Jeremy Hunt write Liz Truss's political suicide note for her and deliver it to the House of Commons yesterday?
Maybe, but in many ways, actually, Jeremy Hunt has actually helped save, I would think, Liz Truss, at least for the time being. I would suggest, Patrick. He's given her a little bit of breathing space. You've mentioned the fact that the markets have calmed down. That is calmed temperatures in the place behind me a tad, as in MPs are willing to give her, I think, a little bit more room, though that is not to say that there are lots and lots of really difficult obstacles ahead for this government. You talked about one of them, the triple lock pensions. Are the Conservative Party still committed to that? Well, neither the Prime Minister's spokesperson or indeed the Chancellor's spokesperson could commit the government to ensuring that pensioners had that triple lock in terms of the increase they could see in the years to come. Add to that what's going to happen to benefits. Are they going to be linked to earnings or to inflation, which is clearly a lot higher than earnings at the moment? Again, the government refusing to state any commitment. What about defence spending? again, a really tricky subject. The UK is committed to reaching 3% of GDP of defence spending by the end of this decade. The government still committed to that? We don't know. Ministers have suggested they would resign if that wasn't the case. And all this, of course, while the pressure on Liz Truss continues to grow. I've just spoken to one Conservative MP this afternoon who suggests that the carpet outside Sir Graham Brady's office has been worn away by the number of people submitting letters. I think the next key test, though, for Liz Truss will come tomorrow lunchtime at PMQs. Now, PMQs come and go. Sometimes you have a good one, sometimes you have a bad one. It is fair to say, Patrick, Liz Truss needs not just a good one, but a stonky one tomorrow to reassert her authority. Will it be enough, though? That's the big question, because if you look at the opinion polls, look at that poll amongst Conservative members, where 4 in 10 of the people who backed her this summer now suggest she needs to go immediately. The pressure on Liz Truss shows no sign of relenting anytime soon.
No, Darren, look, thank you very, very much. Darren McCaffrey there, who is GB News' political editor, live in Westminster. Rather a lot for us to consider here when it comes to Liz Truss. Some of these latest opinion polls, 80-odd% of people think that actually she's doing a bad job. Then also as well, you've got more than 50% of Tory party members who were polled saying that actually they think that she should step down. It's no great shock, is it, that the vast majority of Conservative Party members would now want Boris Johnson back in post? Do you think that's possible to happen? Do you think it would be possible now for the nation to go, hang on a minute, all right, Boris, all is forgiven, come back? I'll tell you one thing, though, I do think that the Labour Party would absolutely hate it if they had Boris Johnson back in charge, sat over there on the government benches. Also joining me now, though, is Conservative councillor for Sevenoaks Kippington. It's Andrew Eyre. Andrew, thank you very much. In your view, does Liz Truss now have to go? You are, of course, a Conservative councillor.
I think the problem she has is she started off so badly. There's no question she made huge bad economic decisions. I think she'll get to rue bringing Jeremy Hunt back. I think that was a mistake, albeit, as you were saying earlier, that the markets have calmed. Now, should Boris come
Andrew,
back?
Sorry,
No,
I was saying that a little bit tongue-in-cheek because, to be honest with you, this idea, this big growth agenda was not very well articulated. There was no real attempt to sell it to the nation, and they created a void and a vacuum that was filled by the Labour Party at Labour Party conference, where they were allowed to make it seem as though the Tories hated poor people and loved the rich, and it created a pretty bad situation, and that media buzz got on top of it, and that ramped it all up. But actually now what's happened is that we've just got Jeremy Hunt, who's a staunch Remainer globalist, a chap who wasn't against mandatory vaccinations and essentially these big COVID camps, the antithesis, really, of what a lot of Conservative Party members, I think, would like. And it does look just like the men in suits have taken over now, and I'm not sure that voters want that, do they?
I don't think they want what's happening now, certainly. And I agree that there was clear blue water between what Liz Truss was saying and what Rishi Sunak was saying in the leadership election, and the members chose the vision. Liz Truss said, I have a vision, how do we get there? This is how we're going to get there. And then, as you exactly say, Patrick, they didn't enunciate that, they didn't sign that, they didn't make that very clear at all. And they've just been slaughtered in the ratings. Should we change? No, I don't think we should. We've made the decision. The thing is there now, as I said before. I think bringing Jeremy Hunt back has calmed the markets, but in the medium term will be a problem for Liz Truss. In a sense, this is only no different from what Blair and Brown was. The only difference was that they hid it for 10 years, whereas this, in the age of social media, everything's out front and everything out.
Yeah, Andrew, I think for me, look, like everyone can agree. I mean, Stevie Wonder could see that it wasn't particularly well articulated what Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng were trying to do, right? So there is that, and that is a problem. They made that mistake, and there has to be, there were consequences to that mistake. However, going for growth was designed to create a bigger cake and give everyone a bigger slice of that cake. Whereas what Jeremy Hunt's just done, as far as I can see, is appease the markets and financial men and bankers, which I'm not sure really, when my energy bill drops in January or February, or yours does, or Joe Bloggs from Nuneaton, or wherever we've just done a Vox Pop from. I mean, actually, who's Jeremy Hunt working for here? Is he the Chancellor for the people, or is he the Chancellor that's going to keep bankers happy?
He is taken on board the careful finances which Rishi Sunak put forward. I voted for Rishi Sunak. I would have preferred him to have taken forward a passion for growth, which is sort of what he was saying, but he was going to do it very carefully. What Liz Truss did was the clear blue sky. She said, I have a vision, I want to move forward. And she has failed to do that. Should we change? No, we shouldn't. We should keep going. And exactly as you say, Patrick, we should be aiming for a bigger pie.
Well, fingers crossed we can aim for a bigger pie. I mean, my concern is that this idea now they've got, libertarian free market economics is dead in the water and always will be. Like it was libertarian free market economics who got us into this situation. It's not really been that way at all for however long. And then they tried it for a grand total of 2 weeks and got told, no, that would be absolutely outrageous. And now we're back with Jeremy Hunt. I mean, for goodness sake, this guy. But anyway, are you concerned as a Conservative councillor when you go door knocking and you diligently do speak to your residents in Sevenoaks, Kippington, that actually the Conservative brand under Liz Truss is a lot harder to sell than it was under Boris Johnson?
Well, under both of them, it's almost impossible to sell. There is no question that the chaos in Westminster is causing local councils and local councillors a huge problem. And for the election in May next year, there will be a huge problem. I had hoped that Liz Truss, with her vision, would get things moving, and then things would happen relatively quickly, and that by next May, councillors will be able to say, look what's happening, instead of having to say, ignore London, which is ignore Westminster, which is what we're having to say. But in practice, what's happening is sorry, my phone just rang.
No, that's all right. It's probably Liz Truss. It's Liz Truss saying, stick up for me a bit more, stick up for me a bit more. But no, look, it's a good point for us to finish, actually, because I've got to go and have a chat with someone about energy bills, not least my own at the minute, the way that Jeremy Hunt's gone about. But look, I really do appreciate you coming on, Andrew. Great to have you on the show. Yes. And look, good luck to you as well, door knocking. It's not going to be an easy thing at the minute. Andrew, their Conservative councillor for Sevenoaks and Kippington. Grief. Right, what do you make of all of this, people? I must say, it's a real shame what's going on at the minute, isn't it? But as part of yesterday's mini-budget U-turn, yeah, I know, the Chancellor announced that the energy price guarantee will come to an end in April. Cheers, Jeremy. Which has led to reports that households could then face bills of over £4,000, some say £5,000, and I've just been talking about having blackouts apparently between 4 and 7 p.m. on weekdays. So I think we can all agree that this budget, was better than the last one. Madness. Anyway, the energy price guarantee was initially expected to remain in place for 2 years and would cap average bills at £2,500. Jeremy Hunt stated that after April, the most vulnerable would continue to be protected from soaring wholesale energy prices, but uncertainty has surfaced and concerns have been raised about how this support will be allocated. But at least we've calmed the markets. Joining me now is Matt Copeland, who's Head of Policy at the fuel poverty charity National Energy Action. From where you're sitting, Matt, what's better? Was it this, where now apparently some bills could go up to £5,000 and we might have blackouts in January and February? Were you happier with what Kwasi Kwarteng wanted to do? Where are you at?
I think it's fair to say, really, that the difference between the weekend when we knew what the support was going to be over a 2-year period and now is quite significant. So there'll be millions of households across the country who, on Monday morning, they knew that they were protected for that period, and now will be very, very worried because whilst the Chancellor said that they can protect the most vulnerable as of April, no one knows who's going to be in that cohort, and therefore no one knows whether they're going to be paying the £2,500 or maybe less than that if there's more support, or, as you say, £4,000 plus for a typical household after April. And that will just mean huge amounts of anxiety for people up and down the country, just not knowing what their finances will look like. And it is incredibly urgent that the government get to move on really and decide what they're going to do after April.
Yeah, Matt, do you find it a little bit confusing, as I do, that I was sat here when Kwasi Kwarteng announced that initial budget, and the initial reaction to that was pretty good, and then things changed a little bit. Then all of a sudden it became disastrous and we were crashing a pound and the country was going to hell in a handcart. And now then, we've got Jeremy Hunt, who's announced something yesterday. A bit of that means that millions, if not tens of millions of people, as you've rightly said, are waking up this morning thinking, how the flipping heck am I going to turn the heating on in January? And now this is a good thing. Do you not think this is a bit weird?
Well, I think a lot of people will be very confused about what's happening with their energy bills at the moment. It's changed so much over the past 6 months, but in that 3-week period, to go from the certainty of a limit on unit prices over the next 2 years to the vast uncertainty that we've got from April onwards now, people will be very confused as to how we've come to that conclusion. And as I said, the anxiety that particularly low-income families will have, not knowing if they will get that protection in the future, will be really significant.
Well, Matt, look, good luck to you. And obviously the now millions of families who, thanks to what was announced yesterday, have absolutely no idea how they're going to pay for their heating this winter. But there we go. Thank you very much. Matt Copeland, who is the head of policy at the fuel poverty charity National Energy Action. What do you make of this, ladies and gentlemen? Are you as confused as I am? I mean, I had our economics and business editor here earlier, Liam Halligan, who very diligently came into the studio, cycled across London to get here. That's how passionately he felt about trying to get his views out there and his reporting of the facts out there, actually, which is that, well, when you really break it down, who are the big winners out of Jeremy Hunt's budget? I'm not sure. Anyway, there we go. This is GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. Coming up, something a little bit lighter. Should all school pupils in the UK be made to learn the national anthem? The government social mobility czar, Catherine Birbalsingh, says so. She claims it's not just good for the kids, but it will help ethnic minority pupils feel like they belong in the country. Is it a good thing for patriotism? Do you think it's the right thing to do? Does every country have the right to teach kids the national anthem and then, in a way, make them sing it? First, though, it's a short break.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Right, lots of you have been getting in touch about one of the other main stories of the day, which is, yes, I'm sorry to report this, Just Stop Oil again, because some of their protesters are still up a bridge. It was really terrible, wasn't it, that some people decided to let off some fireworks near them last night. Couldn't possibly condone that. Anyway, Paddy says, good name, Paddy, surely there are preventative measures on the cables to stop people accessing support cables and other superstructures. It is really concerning that people are able to do this at all. In fact, that's a really good point, Paddy, actually. It is concerning. Surely this is a massive threat. Now, they're just showing people, if you were that way inclined, exactly how you could presumably cause some monstrous structural damage to a major arterial bridge. But there we go. Pamela's been on. She says they should not be allowed to get their own way over and above the rest of the population. They do not have the right to disrupt the country from going about their businesses. Yes, I understand that, Pamela, but one thing that we all have to understand is that these people all too often were sent off to fabulously expensive boarding schools by parents who didn't really like them, and then now they're spending the rest of their lives trying to get back at mummy and daddy. There we are. Richard says, these protesters do cause chaos, but if they are willing to do something as risky as scale a bridge, then they clearly feel very strongly about their cause. I don't fully sympathise with them, but the lengths they are going to be heard is pretty astonishing. You could make a similar argument about terrorist groups, couldn't you? Which, of course, we couldn't do in this case. But if they're willing to go to any lengths to get themselves heard, doesn't necessarily make it OK. Right. The chair of Social Mobility Commission is calling on all school children to learn the national anthem, or risk being taught that they don't belong in their own country. So Catherine Birbalsingh stated that teachers should make sure ethnic minority children know the national anthem, even if it makes teachers uncomfortable. Why would it make teachers uncomfortable? Ridiculous stuff. And she also criticised the identity politics shaping a school culture and the drive to decolonise the curriculum. Joining me now to discuss this is the new deputy leader of the UK Independence Party, UKIP, Rebecca Jane. Rebecca, thank you very much for joining us. Do you think that kids should learn the national anthem at school and belt it out during assembly?
I think it's a bit of a difficult situation, as always. Do I think that all children who are in Great Britain today should be taught the national anthem? Absolutely, because they are in Great Britain and this is our culture and this is our heritage. Completely agree with that. Where I think that we have to draw the line is forcing children to sing it. I don't think that that's okay. I think that when we talk about free speech, we have to understand, listen and educate. And I think if we're forcing children and their families into singing the national anthem, I think that we're going too far, but I definitely think that they need to be taught it, yes.
One of the things that Catherine Birbalsingh said that it might help to do is help to promote integration. We do have a lot of children who are either immigrants themselves or come from, say, first-generation immigrant families, and that maybe they don't always feel as part of British culture or as aware of British culture as they could do. So potentially this is a way of helping to sculpt national identity, all uniting under one song. There's nothing presumably racist or anything about that. It is our national anthem, isn't it?
I think that that's possibly, there's nothing racist about it. It is our national anthem. They do need to be taught it. But I think that that's actually where you get division, when we're trying to ram it down the necks and say, this is what you must do. And then we'll go in the opposite direction. I know if you tell me something that I've got to do, I'm probably going to go, no, and I'm going to do what I want. Thank you very much. So we should be asking them to embrace it. And it's the way that actually we try and help them to understand of why it's important and actually appeal to, you know what, this is why we love our country, rather than make it into something negative of you must do this. That's not going to help racially integrate anybody.
It was really interesting, though, because I think in this country we end up with a lot of apologising for things that we don't have to be sorry for a lot of the time. And I decided that I was going to go and stand outside Buckingham Palace, which is, let's be honest, where you find a load of foreign tourists, right, and ask them whether or not they thought that children in this country should be taught the national anthem and maybe sing it at schools. And every single one of them looked like I was mad, because they were just like, well, yeah, this is absolutely fine. So why not just do that, really? And stay where you are, by the way, Rebecca Jane, Deputy Leader of UKIP, because I have some breaking news. Here we go. Get ready, people. Strap yourselves in, or unhook yourselves, in this case, because within the last few minutes, 2 Just Stop Oil activists who have blocked the Dartford crossing for the past 2 days have agreed to end their protest. They must have been watching the show. Just Stop Oil tweeted, I won't name them, they don't deserve it, have agreed to cooperate with police and leave the bridge. Just Stop Oil will continue in civil resistance to harmful politics and our criminal government to protect our rights, freedom and the rule of law, which I think is a fancy way of saying they got a little bit cold and hungry and they absolutely bottled it. I would have just left them up there. Anyway, witnesses at the scene saw the raised platform brought in by Essex Police being elevated in the last hour. Bringing more on it as we have it. I believe Rebecca Jane is still there, Deputy Leader of UKIP. We'll bring you back up in a second. Right, well, look, we were talking about the national anthem in school. I think we've made our point about that, haven't we, now? So shall we have a quick chat about this breaking news? Would you have left them up there?
Please.
What would you have done?
Say that again, sorry.
Would you have left Just Stop Oil up there? Would you have, I don't know, fined them for wasting police time? What would you do?
Honestly, if there is one appeal that I want to make is that I hope that the courts throw the absolute book at these complete and utter attention-seeking morons. I have had enough. They win Moron of the Year 2021 and now they win it for 2022. Congratulations. Clear off and stop being morons. You are never, ever going to get people to sign up for your cause and educate people by doing such outlandish and nonsense stunts. It has to stop, and that stops when the courts start heavily punishing people.
Look, I agree with you. At what point does it become bracketed in some kind of terrorist offence? At what point do we end up going, hang on a minute, you're wasting police time? I think they should be made to go and meet the mums and dads of teenagers who were stabbed to death at exactly the same time police were dealing with ungluing some bloke who was too annoyed that his mum and dad sent him off to an expensive boarding school because they didn't love him enough, and will spend the rest of their life getting back to him. Anyway, Rebecca, I could talk to you all day about this. Rebecca Jane, thank you very much. We got a 2-for-1 for Rebecca there. She's only on to talk about the national anthem, and then we got some breaking news of Just Stop Oil. You'd love to see it. Deputy Leader of UKIP. Right, OK, well, we're going to move on now to something else. In fact, I'm going to give you the latest news. But before that, just a little tease about what I've got coming up the other side of it. Residents at a neighbourhood in Nottingham have claimed that they're too scared to go out of their doors because sex workers are operating near their homes. You can't move for sex workers in Nottingham, apparently. So what are the rules and regulations surrounding sex work in the UK? I will speak to a former sex worker next. But first, it is your latest headlines.
Patrick, thank you. Good evening to you. Cabinet ministers have been told they need to save taxpayers' money, but the public spending will continue to rise overall. Ministers left Downing Street this morning after the new Chancellor said their budgets needed to be cut. Jeremy Hunt also says cost-cutting should focus on areas which will not affect public services. Public spending currently stands at £1 trillion a year. British households are being warned to prepare for potential blackouts in the new year. The National Grid's chief executive says the power cuts could happen on really cold weekdays in January and February between about 4 and 7 p.m. John Pettigrew issued the blackout warning during the Financial Times' Energy Transition Summit as he outlined what might happen if generators fail to secure enough gas from Europe to meet UK demand. And the 2 Just Stop Oil activists that blocked the Dartford crossing for the past 2 days as you've just heard, agreed to end their protest. In a joint statement, they said, "We successfully disrupted oil supplies to Kent and the South East for 36 hours, and we are now stepping down." National Highways says there is still about 6 miles of congestion on either side of the crossing. And auctioneers in Edinburgh say they are flabbergasted in the huge interest being shown in a print reproduction of Balmoral Castle painted by His Majesty the King. His prints usually sell for around £400 to £600, but this particular painting from 2001 has sparked international interest and is expected to fetch much more. It's thought to be the first time a print by a reigning monarch has been auctioned, and it'll be open to bidding on Thursday. That's it. You're up to date on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. You're with GB News, the People's Channel. Don't go anywhere. We're back in a moment.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Residents of a neighbourhood in Nottinghamshire have said that they're scared to leave their homes due to an influx of sex workers in the area. People in Hyson Green have even complained prostitutes have sex up against their homes. So could this problem be a symptom of prostitution being forced underground or indeed up against the home? While the practice is legal, many of the practices around soliciting sex for money or managing a brothel are prohibited by law. Joining me now is former sex worker and founder of the Retrieve charity, which helps those struggling from addiction. It's Natasha Wyatt. Natasha, thank you very, very much. What do you make of this? Because it's not the only area in the UK that has previously had quite a large amount of sex workers in it. They've tried various different things in different areas, haven't they, including essentially legalising it all. Just talk to me a bit about what you make of this situation in Nottingham.
OK, well, for myself, I live in Holbeck in Leeds. And as you'll know, that was a zone that was legalised for a number of years and then was closed down last year. So what do I make of it? It's a very complex situation. Now, myself being a former sex worker and now, you know, working with the women, but also living as a resident in Holbeck, I do sympathise with the residents of Nottingham. So I can see both sides. It's not an easy situation, you know.
I suppose one could argue that actually if there wasn't a demand for it, then there wouldn't be the service as well. So maybe we should be looking at the type of individual who decides to go and utilise the services of a sex worker. But I suppose there's another side of it as well, isn't there, which is that presumably a lot of people who work in the sex industry maybe are doing it to help fund certain addictions, for example. So do you want to talk to me a bit about that as well? How can we combat that?
Well, that was my issue. You know, I didn't just wake up and think, oh, you know, I want to go and do this. This is what I want to do. Unfortunately, I battled a 15-year crack and alcohol addiction, which then led me down the path of feeding my habit through prostitution. And that's what most of these ladies are doing. They have a physical and mental addiction. They are battling mental health. And they are the most vulnerable women that there are, you know, especially out on the streets and street working. And it's the hardest thing ever, because I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for these ladies in question. But let me tell you, it's not something you want to do. You are addicted, and you will do anything you can to feed that addiction, which unfortunately for women is to sell their bodies.
I suppose for some of these residents who are complaining, and let's be honest, it mustn't be nice, especially if you've got young kids and you open your front door and there's people visibly engaging in sex acts in the middle of the street, which some of these residents say is happening. So there you go. Does that mean that we should maybe make it easier to do in a private setting? If it's going to happen anyway, and it is going to happen anyway, should there be certain locations maybe where the police allow it to happen? I mean, look, let's be honest, we've managed to utilise hotels for other things in this country recently and found the space there. Maybe we should do it for sex workers as well.
Now, to be honest with you, like I say, I can't condone the girls' actions. You know, it's not nice. I live in Holbeck. I have children, you know, and the residents and myself, it's hard. You know, our children are seeing this, and they're seeing the women on the street corners, and they are seeing, you know, the paraphernalia that they leave about. It's not nice. And no resident should have to see that, and no children, because I believe what's happening is we're having to explain to our children what this is and what that is before their time. You know, however, how do we deal with this? Well, we did try to legalise the zone in Holbeck in Leeds, and it didn't work. It failed miserably, because what it did is it lured a lot of predators in, and young girls were being approached, and it was horrific, if I'm honest. It was not the option. So how do we deal with this? As you said, it is going to continue, but we need to look at a broader plan. You know, the women, they need to want to get clean too. They're going to want to have to change this lifestyle, which isn't always easy when you have a heroin addiction or a crack addiction and you've been doing it for 15, 20 years. But you are correct. And I think teamwork, community coming together, counsellors, police, how are we going to look at this? How are we going to work together to get these women? But again, like you touched on, which I'm really glad you touched on, is that if, you know, there wasn't demand, these men are coming into these women in their right minds. The women are not in their right minds.
Yeah, no, this is it. I mean, we can't get around that. I mean, I think people, you know, assume, all right, OK, whatever's going on in these women's lives, as you've rightly said, I would imagine there's very, very few women who wake up one day and decide they actively want to do this for the enjoyment and the love of it, right? So, you know, they've got whatever they've got going on, but there are blokes there who just actively enjoy this service, and they are potentially the ones to blame, are they? I mean, is this something we have to look at, actually? What's going on for the men involved here?
Well, exactly. I'm not being funny, but, you know, the men that come down here into Holbeck with the women that I work with, let me tell you, they're coming in nice cars, from work, big positions, car seats in the back of their car. They are married, but they come to these women because these women will do what their wives won't. And these women are vulnerable. They know they need their drugs, you know, and they'll be sick without the heroin, because heroin is a physical addiction, crack is a mental addiction, and the men know this. So I think as well, you know, certain men need help. They've got an addiction to sex.
Indeed. Well, look, thank you very much. And just give a little cheeky plug as well for, is it the Retrieve charity? Yes, it is. What you guys do, how people can get involved.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we live in Holbeck, Leeds. We work around the West Yorkshire area, going around to different, you know, zones all over. If anyone wants to get in touch, they can drop us an email at info@retrieve.org.uk.
Good stuff. All right, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show, and good luck with everything going forward. That is, of course, former sex worker turned founder of the Retrieve charity, helping people struggling from addiction. It's Natasha Wire, reacting to the fact that now, apparently, there are parts of Nottingham where you just can't move for sex workers. But there we are. Lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts about the Just Stop Oil protest at Dartford Crossing ending. That's right, if you're just joining us, those two absolute pillocks who decided to scale the Dartford Crossing and stop people from getting across it, they have now decided to come down. Why? Because you and me and everyone we know who's a taxpayer has apparently funded the police to go up there in a crane or a plinth or whatever it's called and talked to them, and they've decided probably they are a bit nippy now, maybe a bit hungry, and it's time to go and get a soya macchiato vegan latte from somewhere. So they've brought them down. Hopefully they have a nice time in prison. Terry says, I think they came down because they needed to use the toilet. It does beg the question, Terry, doesn't it? What's been going on in those sleeping bags up there for them? But there we are. Peter says, Margaret Thatcher many years ago referred in the context of the IRA to not giving them the oxygen of publicity. I recall that the media criticised her for this and continue to give them that publicity. It is now the case that the media is also going down that wrong road with the environmental protesters. Sadly, as with the IRA, the media and the environmentalists also fed off one another. It's a very tricky situation, to be honest with you, there, because I do completely understand what you're saying, and it's unfortunate. What I would say is that, as yet, Peter, there appears to be no sign of Just Stop Oil getting what they want, and certainly on this show, the only media coverage they're getting is, look how annoying these trust fund so-and-sos are. Anyway, there we go. What do you make of all of this, though? Should we just be putting a media barrier up? My concern with that is they might do things more and more extreme. You mentioned the IRA there. I do think there is call, potentially, for us to have a little look at certain terror laws in this country and just wonder whether or not environmental terrorism incorporates these people. But there we are. Graham says, don't they realise negativity never works? Shouldn't they put their energy, see what you did there, Graham, and effort into trying to explain where they are coming from and why Stop Oil means nothing? We should leave the protesters on the bridge where they are for as long as they want to stay there. I'm with you on that. I think it was Graham. I said, well, why don't you just open the bridge, let them stay there, don't give them any chance of coming down unless they can make their own way down. And then one of my producers made the point, what if you were driving along and one of them fell off the bridge and thundered through your windscreen and killed you or whatever? So there is that. But I really do think this lot should have the absolute buck thrown at them. For example, if you don't pay your licence fee, so you can't watch Gary Lineker looking like football's equivalent of David Dickinson talking to you in high definition, whether or not you even watch that, OK, you pay your licence fee. If you don't pay it, all of a sudden you get a knock on the door. Even elderly people, it's the only company they have in their home every single day. They don't pay the TV licence fee. Someone comes along and threatens them with prison if they don't pay it. Well, hang on a minute, what about this lot? They've brought an arterial route between Kent and Essex to a standstill for days. They've cost police resources. Even those numpties who've glued themselves to a road in London, 50-odd police officers had to go and deal with that earlier on today. In the meantime, how much drug dealing is taking place? In the meantime, we don't have the resources to deal with what's going on in the Channel. In the meantime, people are getting stabbed to death. Can we not do this lot for wasting police time and much, much more? Frankly, I think they should go and meet the parents of kids who've died of gang-related issues in the meantime while the police have been tied up dealing with those glued-up numpties. Anyway, and we also have lots of you getting in touch with your thoughts on the current state of our politics as well. Peter says, if Hunt breaks the triple lock, this is on pensions, the Silver Surfers will stop the Conservatives in the next election. But who do they vote for then, Peter? The pensioners will make sure they pay at the ballot box. Yes, potentially, I can agree with you on that. David says, Truss needs to do the honest thing and resign before she causes more damage to the nation. I get what you mean, but I, for the life of me, feel more so than ever now that we are being run by an establishment blob, frankly, where you're not allowed to deviate from the complete and utter status quo. And if you dare to do something radical like, oh, I don't know, go for growth, which actually, spoiler alert, wasn't particularly radical to begin with, you get blocked. Whereas it's not radical, apparently, and not damaging at all to me now that people woke up this morning unable to have any reassurance about how they can pay their sky-high energy bills in January and in February and beyond all of that. Roger says, Truss has mismanaged the economy, but ultimately she has not committed a crime. She was elected exactly in accordance with the Tory party rules. She should carry on as normal, doing her best. And if the Tory party drag her out, we will see why they were called the nasty party in the days gone by. Fascinating stuff, isn't it? Because as far as I can see, it would appear as though several Conservative MPs are happy for their colleagues to lose their jobs or for themselves to lose their jobs in order to just get her out and then maybe give Labour a go for a bit. In the meantime, what happens to this country? But earlier today, some of Liz Truss's own constituents were asked their own thoughts on her premiership, and they were quite critical. Here is what they had to say.
I think she's out of her depth, really. So I think just delaying the inevitable, I think she's going to have to resign.
I don't think she's ever looked really comfortable in the job. and I think she possibly knows that that's what they were intending anyway. So, but I don't think she's probably the right one. Also, don't think Rishi Sunak is. I don't know who is, but I don't think they're doing a brilliant job anyway at the moment.
She looks out of the depths to me, quite frankly. Yeah. If I was her, I'd pack it in.
Well, there you go. I mean, that last chap there makes quite a good point, doesn't it? I mean, at least she actually wanted the job. I do understand that things have not gone smoothly for her. And yes, I think there was a case of trying to do too much a bit too soon. However, it was the communications that were terrible. And what's fascinating is that there's probably some people working in a communications office who you will never have heard of, you will never hear of. They will hop from one job like that to another job like that. And actually, if they'd have put their arm around Truss and Kwarteng and said, you can drop this economic grenade now, but just explain it, OK, and keep explaining it and bring the people with you, we wouldn't be here. And instead, we've got a drip in a suit as our new Chancellor, who, as far as I can see, wanted us to all remain in the European Union and wouldn't have thought twice about mandating COVID vaccines. Great move. Right, within the last 20 minutes or so, the two Just Stop Oil activists who've blocked the Dartford crossing for the past 2 days have agreed to end their protest. Just Stop Oil tweeted, won't name them and won't name them, have agreed to cooperate with police and leave the bridge. Just Stop Oil will continue in civil resistance to harmful politics in our criminal government to protect our rights, freedoms and the rule of law. Right, so witnesses at the scene saw the raised platform brought in by Essex Police at the cost of the British taxpayer being elevated within the last hour. Let's now speak to human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell. Peter, they'll be a lot warmer on the inside of a prison cell, won't they?
Well, look, you're wrong. They did not block the traffic. They were up high on the bridge. It was the police who blocked the traffic. The police bear responsibility.
You couldn't, Peter, come on now. You can't, if you'll excuse the pun, suspend logic. Because if these people had dropped off their signs, they could have killed innocent people. So, yes, technically the police stopped the bridge, but they had to, didn't they? Because these people had scaled it.
Well, the people who scaled it were professionals who knew what they were doing. There was no danger of them falling off. The police should have just left them there and they would have come down of their own accord at no public cost whatsoever.
Hang on a minute. Do we agree on something? Peter, you'd have just left them there completely.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Sweet, right? That's the world's shortest interview. No, I'm only joking. Peter, no, seriously though, why? I suppose, is there not a human rights issue to leaving them there? I suppose there isn't if it's their own, if they're there of their own volition, aren't they?
Yeah, they made the choice. They were able to get up. They were able to get down of their own volition as well. So there was no need for the police to be involved at all. They should just be left there to come down when they decided to come down.
Absolutely. Well, I think Just Stop Oil are calling you just to say, hang on a minute, what are you saying? You're supposed to be on our side. But no, Peter, just continuing. What about the ones that glued themselves in the middle of the road then? Do you agree that they have to be removed, or would you leave them there as well?
Well, I think if they are causing, I don't support, permanent disruption. I mean, some degree of disruption is justified, but of course, emergency vehicles must always be allowed through. And in my experience, that is what they've done. I've been on protests where people have sat down on blockaded roads, but as soon as emergency vehicles have come by, they've made sure that those who are not stuck to the road move out of the way and the emergency vehicle is able to get through. That's absolutely paramount. We must not obstruct emergency vehicles.
Well, that's part of the problem, isn't it? That's part of the problem, because I did have a rather awkward exchange with a chap who's the director of communications or whatever for Just Stop Oil, who was in the studio with me last week. He said, yeah, we've got a blue light policy. And then the next day, right on cue, a video of an ambulance not being able to get through, did emerge, and he didn't really have much of an answer for that. So that is a problem. But do you not think there's a bigger picture here, which is that whilst the police are diverting resources to deal with these people, that actually there are other issues at play there, whether it's people involved in drug gangs or violent crime or domestic abuse, for example, murders, burglaries, we'll take your pick, right, who are not getting dealt with because there's these people in the road or on a bridge. And is that not a problem? Do we have a bigger picture here to deal with?
The police are putting far too many resources into policing protests when they should be going after robbers and rapists and men who beat their wives, that kind of thing. These are not serious crimes. The police should have a much lower profile and mostly hands-off approach. I've been on lots of protests where there's been no law breaking at all or any intention to break the law, and we've had for like 10 protesters 50 police. It's a complete overkill, which, as you say, is diverting the police from tackling serious crime.
It is, and I do wonder as well, which I'm sure is something that you will not necessarily agree with, and I wouldn't ask you to agree with, but in Patrick Christys' Britain, I wouldn't bother with the old anti-glue stuff. I'd get him off, but there you go. Peter, thank you very much. Peter Tatchell there, human rights campaigner. Right, well, that's all we have time for today, ladies and gentlemen. An action-packed show during which I asked you and indeed a load of foreign people outside Buckingham Palace whether or not they thought that we should sing the national anthem in our schools. The vast majority of people said yes. We've also dealt with Just Stop Oil finally being removed from a bridge, and Truss. Do you think she'll still be in charge this time tomorrow? I think so. You've been watching Patrick Christys right here on GB News Live. Michelle Dewberry follows on from me. Make sure you watch that. It's always box office, but right now, it's your weather.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Hope you're making the most of today's fine weather because the rest of the week looking a little more mixed. It's going to stay pretty warm actually, but there will be spells of wet and windy weather too, courtesy of this area of low pressure that's making slow but steady progress towards us. Ahead of that, we've got high pressure dominating today, which is why most places have been fine, but we're already seeing the cloud thickening and the winds picking up in the southwest. There are still one or two very scattered showers across the far northeast. For most, though, it's a fine evening, but we'll start to see that weather front bringing some showers across southwest England into parts of Wales and by dawn, not far away from Northern Ireland. Elsewhere, though, most places will be drier. Chillier night in the far north of Scotland, but for most it'll be warmer than last night and a really quite warm night across parts of the south. This rain could be quite heavy in the morning, some big downpours, some showers across Wales extending into Northern Ireland, some bright colours there too, so again some heavy rain is likely. Gusty winds also, particularly across Wales and southwest England, getting gustier as the day goes on. A few showers for the Midlands, maybe later northwest England, but a good part of eastern England. Most of Scotland will again be dry and bright. With the breeze picking up from the North Sea, though, some of those eastern coasts will be a little chilly, whereas again in the south, warm air in place, so with a bit of sunshine. Temperatures getting into the high teens. Likely to see the rain pepping up a little more in the west as we go through the evening, and the winds getting very gusty too, particularly across parts of north and west Wales. That band of rain then marches northwards into Thursday, making for a wet start across parts of Scotland. That should tend to clear away to the north. Further showers could follow across parts of East Anglia and the southeast, but much of the west will have a dry and a brighter day on Thursday with a bit more in the way of sunshine, and milder air is spreading northwards as well. Temperatures likely to be quite a bit higher on Thursday, again getting into the high teens across the south, and the winds will be lighter by then as well.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio,